Hello.
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 How's it going? What's going on?
How's it going?
Hi, everyone, and hi, chat. Chat, we were just hanging out, having an extremely...
Oh, chat's here. Right.
Oh, yeah. I forgot. I invited them. Is that okay?
No, it's fine. Yeah. No, it's cool.
Okay.
Especially that one chatter. Like, you know that one I was telling you? I'm so glad that they're here. That one chatter, they're my favorite.
Oh, I just saw them. Yeah,
I saw them too. I'm so excited they're here.
I mean, that one, No, I'll DM you about it.
I thought we were. I thought we were going to talk.
No. I'll DM you.
Okay.
It's definitely a problematic phase.
Okay, definitely problematic fave. Got it. All right.
Everyone in the chat being like, "It's me.
Hi, chatters. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the show. Welcome to episode 6, if I number correctly, which I haven't always done, but if I number correctly, it's episode 6 of Red Planet. And today we're going to be talking about squatting. But of course, as per Red Planet tradition, we start with the 4 perma hosts of the show to talk about some stuff. And then we're going to bring on our guests in about an hour. Our guest for today is AmyeC3, who's a good friend of mine. Also, a lot of you watch her streams, love her content. You all know that, many of you know that she is a very ardent, very incredibly based supporter of unhoused people, an unhoused advocate. And so she's going to come on to talk about squatting and on private property and stuff like that. So get ready for that. That'll be in about an hour. But first, we're just going to hang out and chit chat about stuff. Check in with Chad as well.
Just vibe.
Just vibe. Honestly, just
vibing. Really, yeah.
We were vibing in the intro. we could just go right back to that. Just
carry on vibing.
Well, we were talking about the main stuff that we were going to be talking about today. So yeah, we'll save that for later. Oh wait, no, we were talking about positive leftist news, right?
I was asking if there's any news this week.
There's positive leftist news? I was under the impression there was never anything positive to talk about. Chad, did you know this?
Yes.
Fucking hell.
But it's even better than that. There's a whole channel called Positive Leftist News, or PLN is actually the channel name, and they released a new video this week because they do a monthly roundup of everything that happened. So not everything that we might talk about will be from this week, but whenever they release, it updates me on a bunch of stuff that I hadn't heard about. Actually, Mule, you streamed something to do with Amnesty International, which is kind of a bit positive. I mean, the subject matter is pretty negative.
Right.
But the thing is kind of...
I think I know what
you tell us. You'd say...
Yeah. So, content warning for Islamophobia, anti-Palestine stuff. We're talking about apartheid. We're talking about Israel. Amnesty International this week confirmed what we already knew, which is that Israel is an apartheid state regarding how they treat Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territories and the Gaza Strip. It was very, if you know, I've done a lot of looking into Israel and Palestine in the past, having grown up in a household where basically my stepdad is literally so pro-Israel, and every single person in my stepfamily is. It was always this is too much of a difficult subject. It's too much of a difficult subject. So I've made it my
That's
business.
The thing, right? They say it's too complicated. We don't want to talk
too complicated. It's too complicated, right? But obviously, most people in the chat know. Everybody in the chat knows it's apartheid, and Amnesty International have confirmed that. And it's when you hear about the stuff. How they're treated, because obviously in the occupied Palestinian territories, that is essentially all open-air prisons. That's how they operate. They operate as, for want of a better word, people don't like it when you say concentration camps because they're not exactly concentration camps, but they're open-air camps where you have to have the IDF's permission to go in between territories and stuff like that. Go on, Bunny.
I don't want to say that they're not concentration camps. If you want to, I think it'd be a safe place to say is just to avoid the verbiage, because I am of the opinion they are, and I think other people are, depending on certain definitions of the term. But I think that the term evokes Auschwitz for people.
Right.
And concentration camps didn't only exist in this one particular fashion. And they can absolutely exist in a modern in a more modern manifestation of it in ways that is not. But I also want to respect. I mean, I always want to let everyone know that I'm a dumbass, and so I'm always trying to learn things, and so I don't want to ever say you're wrong because of something. So I just want to make sure that we can account for that position, because I know a lot of people in the chat have that position.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why, that's why I mentioned it, right? Because it's like, it's just sort of like my way of making things easy to understand.
Yeah,
right?
that's perfectly fair. But yeah, open air prison.
Right.
Everyone should agree. I don't know what you're watching the stream for. You should be extremely. I mean, I'm just gonna say right now, the correct position. Even I, a dumbass, understand this. The correct position is to acknowledge that Israel is an apartheid genocidal state, and that, for instance, the Gaza Strip is an open air prison.
Yeah, and this is obviously it sounds like it's what the fuck is the point of this? We all knew this anyway. What difference is this going to make, kind of thing? And yeah, like I can understand why people would think that, because when you look at something as horrific as that, and how all the other countries in the world, especially countries who are part of the UN, and looking at this and going, oh well, they're breaking international law, but yeah, whatever. That is incredibly doom-pilling, right?
Yeah.
But if you sort of take into consideration that Amnesty International, despite how much they get a lot of shit from established media platforms, right? Like the mainstream media and stuff, but they are actually like recognized internationally as one of the biggest authorities on human rights. So it's like, yeah, brilliant. People are actually starting to take this a little bit seriously now. We're seeing more and more of a resistance to Israeli propaganda regarding Palestinians, and regarding sort of like the weaponization of anti-Semitism in the oppression of Palestinians. And so it's actually really good news, because this is something that's going to lead to more and more people going, holy fucking shit, this is wrong. We need to do something about this. And it's really important now, especially because there are plenty of countries. And I don't know when we did this. I don't know if you can help me with this, Soph, but I don't know when the British government, decided that BDS was no longer fine. Like, it's illegal now. You can't do
we've never acknowledged Palestine as a state, as far as I'm aware, which is really
many
cool.
places
Love
officially
that.
have,
No, it was a weird thing. I don't want to get too derailed, but I was talking about, because I'm researching about conspiracy theories at the moment. There's this concept called stigmatized knowledge, right? Which is like, there's the mainstream knowledge, and then there's stigmatized knowledge, and then there's like some things that are true and some things that are conspiracy theories. Anyway, I was talking about like how someone got some shit really wrong, and if you use their framework, then the existence of Palestine is a conspiracy theory, according to like, if you use like how wrong they got their framework, because like they're like official sources say this, and if you're countering that, then blah blah blah. Anyway, that is a derail. That is a derail. I think it was in the last couple of years. It might have been last year that we kind of made it like this is like BDS is what was, I mean, I don't know the exact legalization that they tried to apply to it. Like,
neither do I. I feel like the government just said we're not okay with this. I don't know. I don't think there was legislation.
As far as I'm aware, it's effectively banned, and I think that anti-Semitism may well have been the justification. But anyway, besides apartheid recognition by Amnesty International,
what is BDS?
BDS is boycott, divest, sanctions, which is a movement to boycott, don't buy things from. Divest, remove investments that you have in, and sanctions, impose economic sanctions on Israel economically. It's an economic strategy of attack to try to end what Israel is doing. The Israeli.
It's kind of laughable because it's like, how do you actually police people not buying products?
Absolutely. It's this statement, it's like them throwing in support with Israel, sort of thing. But it's the same thing that like what people like BDS is basically the same kind of thing. Like it's the same, I guess, like kind of strategies that people were using against South Africa when they had an apartheid state there. When it's like you can't actually like actively go over there and like intervene, or you can't like you can't like just go send soldiers over to do this or whatever like that. So
but, like in lieu of being able to support the oppressed people, you try to withdraw financial support from the oppressor.
Exactly.
But it's interesting. There's a lot of similarity historically, if people want to learn about it, between what people are trying to do now and the apartheid in South Africa. And a lot of the activists, a famous example, Jeremy Corbyn, were very much involved in campaigning to end apartheid in South Africa, and at the same time were doing the same towards Israel. And like there was a weird kind of moment where everyone was like, we did it, we got South Africa, we ended it in South Africa, we'll get it done in like 5 years. with Israel. It'll be done any minute now because we're on a roll, and that's a bit depressing.
Yeah.
Well, it's also really tricky because Israel and South Africa are not equal in like what they are.
Oh,
no, I mean no country ever is, right?
Right, but like it's not. But Israel's. I mean, this maybe I have a pretty radical position on this, but Israel, in my opinion, its entire existence period is genocidal and apartheid. Like its entire existence is, in my opinion, to just serve as, one of the many things, a strategic position in the Middle East for the Americas, military industrial complex.
Yeah.
And so, unlike South Africa, Israel to me is just like a pure manifestation of American imperialism.
Sure, but you could say the same for the white colonizer state of South Africa as it existed under one regime.
True,
right?
Yeah, true.
And then it became
but actually true. Yeah,
right.
Good point.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
you
it's
could say
like
for any state, really.
They might not have used it.
Yeah.
They
might
might
this about like a lot of like
settler colonial,
like borders,
Western Samoa under
borders.
America.
Yeah.
We could say it's about Hawaii.
Haiti under the French.
A lot of these. I mean, it's like I like the term imperialist satellite, which I think makes a lot of sense. Which I interestingly learned because that is how North Korea describe Israel. Which I think like they have a very base take on Israel.
Wow.
It's like, they acknowledge Palestine as being, they acknowledge the state of Palestine, Israel as being legitimate. The only part of Palestine they don't recognize as being Palestinian is the part of it. What is it? The part that is actually Syrian territory, which is
right,
Golan Heights. Which is like probably the most nuanced take on the entire thing from an outside, state or whatever.
But I will say that we at Red Planet officially do not provide takes on North Korea. Officially,
we
provide takes, but we officially do not.
Imperialism everywhere, and
but we do provide takes on more news that happened this week. So who's got some more news?
So what was up in the positive leftist news? The thing, was there an actual new video of that?
Look, there is so much in there, and
we should drop the link.
Like absolutely everybody should go and watch it. Like, we talk a lot about on this show about killing the doom pill, getting all that negativity out.
Really important.
That is the way that you do it. It's so important to watch positive leftist news. I can't tell you how important it is.
I mean, like Mexi's stuff. Like I've been saying recently how I'm pivoting my stuff to do some stuff a bit different. Like Mexi is absolutely what I'm modeling my channel off. Like Mexi's amazing. Yeah. She does such good work. I'm just looking in the description of the episode here to remind myself, and the topics they touch on are free Palestine, workers' rights, food security, decolonization and indigenous rights, LGBTQ rights, Black Lives Matter, fuck the patriarchy is listed as a topic, electoral wins, environmental and animal liberation, and that's all within half an hour. So you just like take half an hour out of your day tomorrow, whatever.
Well, there's a big team. There's a big team.
Oh, okay.
It's a bunch of base comrades.
You can actually email. You can email Positive Leftist News with positive leftist news stories that you have found that you think.
Oh yeah, and I see it now. It's all like Harvey and Tristan and stuff like that. I didn't know that. I thought it was always just Mixie. No, that's amazing. I mean, it's like a tremendous amount of stuff. Yeah.
I'm gonna say
like I say, it's from the whole of last month.
I'm gonna say
surprisingly.
This too. Sorry. I just want to quickly say you can also contact us if you find it. We are probably a smaller establishment in comparison because we are newer, but like. Feel free to reach out to us if you think that, hey, is this really good news? Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes it's like, is this lib shit or is this actually good news? But also contact us so we can like maybe feature it on stream. And if you want, we can be like, blah, 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 gave us this story. And then you could be famous just like us.
How cool would it be if instead of blah, 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 that was your name that Nicole just said? What the fuck?
Yeah,
that would be so poggers.
Incredible.
And
very
speaking of that, that's a good seg into the last piece of news. Unless anybody else has any news to chuck in.
Well, I just wanted to say,
point out there is something in the positive leftist news that is something that I was like aware of, beforehand that I completely forgot about. But the workers at Image Comics have unionized, which is awesome because I mean, comic book workers are fucking terrible. Yeah, I mean, like they get treated so terribly, and maybe they did watch Red Planet and they were like, "Hey, good idea."
Yeah, I mean, it's possible
they
are.
It's possible.
we're still trying to establish, but there's a possibility that they in fact watched Red Planet, and that's where they got the idea.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
I actually, I have known people that have worked for Image before, and you know, like. I wouldn't be surprised if it was someone, but
there you go.
We're definitely not just grasping at straws here. But no,
really
but it's awesome. Because they, if you know anything about the comic industry, you know how it just chews people up and spits them out. Image have been better than a lot of the other studios. Well, since their reappearance on the scene, they've been better. So they were a company that got started back in the day, but they kind of died out for a bit, and then they went through this period a couple years back where they kind of they started getting back into like publishing in a big way again, but instead of kind of like just rehashing all their old properties, they just got a bunch of independent artists, like, you know, all these artists and writers that were indie darlings or whatever, and gave them their old like properties, you know, like these old superheroes that were big in the 90s or whatever, and they were like, hey, look, you know, you like person that, you know, has written a small indie comic about like lesbians at university, take this superhero and just do whatever the fuck you want about it or whatever. And then they did, and they came up with all these great things. But the best part about it is that normally when you're working for a publishing company, everything you create, regardless of whether you do it at home or at work, belongs to them. So nobody ever does their own cool shit, because they're like, you know, they're like, oh, I've got this really good idea for a story, but if I you know, tell anyone about it, they'll just make a shittier version and make Batman do it or something like that, you know?
I think Google have that as well.
Yeah. And so even if they're at home and they're doing their own drawings, writing their own stuff or whatever, it becomes property of, you know, DC Marvel or whatever. So Image were the first to actually be like, nah, just like whatever you make is yours, you know, like whatever you do, it's all your own work. We'll publish it and we'll put it out, but you own the rights to it, you know? And there are all these stories of like, you know, like these creators, like I think one of them is like the dude that created what's the guy from Guardians of the Galaxy, the raccoon guy? I can't remember. But like the guy who wrote those Rocket, yeah. So he I think he's disabled. He had something happen to him and he's like paraplegic or whatever like that. And he's basically was like in a hospital for years, you know, on shitty American healthcare, barely kind of scraping through, while Marvel were making just millions, like billions of dollars, you know, money hand over fist from characters that he had created, sort of thing. And so what Image were doing kind of, you know, like was I guess like kind of like the best that they could do with their corporate structure and still be like this, you know, like what we're gonna say is like a capitalist entity, you know, whatever, to kind of help out their artists like that. But then this is even better. So this is like, you know, like they did what they were doing under their existing framework, and then this is the workers being like, actually, you know, like we think we can do better than that, unionizing. And yeah, it's like I think it was an overwhelming majority, that voted for unionization. So yeah, which is awesome, because it's kind of like that thing, right? Like these companies who have gone from being like small little, you know, whatever publishers and stuff, have become like some of like the biggest, you know, like media empires in you know, in modern entertainment. And so even though Image is small compared to like Marvel and all that kind of shit like that, I think it sets a precedent, you know, like if the Image guys do it, then maybe the DC guys will do it, you know, like if they all get together and they're like, hey, look what, you know, our friends over there got, you know, and then before you know it, awesome. You know, communism.
Before you know it, actually good comics start getting
but that's the other thing.
Oh
right?
god, I mean, that would be so
good for that, but it's also like these people that work into their graves and destroy their hands and bodies doing it. So, you know, all for you know, like for Disney or whatever to cut a check. So this is great.
Really briefly,
interesting.
You had a thing.
Really briefly, just to piggyback, and Dijimi, I don't know if you remember it all what you were talking about before. I hope you wrote it down or something. But like,
I do. I've got it. I know what I'm on about.
Okay.
Thanks.
But Taylor Swift actually re-recorded one of her albums, and called it Taylor's version because of a dispute over rights. So like, there's where she like something about like a legal battle with like, you know, the rights, something. I haven't picked up on the actual details, but it was her way of trying to work around this extremely like shitty industry that was like not giving her the rights to the shit that she created. And so I just want to throw that out there if any of you are Taylor Swift fans.
Well, yeah, that kind of ties in actually, like the whole like Spotify thing, because that was the thing, right? Like all of her music was on Spotify, other people were profiting from it or whatever, so she re-recorded it so that, she would be making money from her own work. And Spotify at the moment is a whole bunch of people are kind of like pulling this stuff from there if they're, able to, because of the whole like Joe Rogan thing, and Joe Rogan's own show, they just dropped like 70 episodes because of the racism in them, like 70 episodes, and
holy shit,
this is everything,
and that's the same thing as book burning. That's book burning, actually.
Yeah,
it is. You're right.
All the episodes are still available elsewhere. You can still, it's still perfectly accessible.
Yeah.
But the interesting
and
thing
also,
is that
it's 1984 is what you're saying. George Orwell talked about this.
No, it's George Orwell, Animal Crossing.
But the interesting thing is,
so this is episodes that contain things like the N-word and things like this, like overt racism, but like over the top racism. But there's still like so much just like race realism and just like full on like fascist.
Sam Harris.
Who's that guy?
They missed the point entirely, right? They just like they.
This is what I call like sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say they focus on these really like, it's like these are the easy shots for them, like, and they're not actually being like, oh shit, we're considering.
Of course not. It's just covering their ass in the most transparent.
This is what I call like in terms of platforms trying to do any kind of approach to social justice. This is what I call magic word, like magic word search, right? Only slurs count as actual racism or homophobia or anything like this, and there's no kind of like any other dynamic at play.
How is that sexist? I never mentioned your gender. I've never mentioned your gender. Why is that even sexist? It's not sexist. I never say anything about you being a woman. Come on.
A person that's good to follow who's been talking about this a lot is Max from the band AmyeC3, who were like big in the 90s.
That's right. I love him.
On Twitter. He's pretty funny, but he's been like kind of, I would say, the most outspoken, like, popular musician or whatever talking about it. And he's pretty funny, but so his whole thing is that their band signed the contract to the record label when they were like 16 or 17 or something, because that's when they had their first big song, who the record label then sold onto Spotify. So even though some of their songs get over 1 million plays a month, they don't actually get any money from it. And he actually brought up the point that it's like this is a profit of child labor.
Incredible.
But then and they're not allowed to remove their music or anything either. So instead, like what they can do is update all of their band artwork on Spotify. So if you go to the AmyeC3 page now, all of their images are like delete Spotify. Which I think is pretty good. And because Spotify have this like anti-censorship platform and stuff, they kind of just said to let them do it. But so it's pretty interesting. I think it's the tide is kind of turning on Spotify. I think a lot of people are saying like, well, what do we do? Do we go to the fucking Amazon service because that's shit as well?
Why are people just not using YouTube? You could just do YouTube playlists. It's the best thing ever. Like,
I think there's definitely a lot of people I've seen talking about actually just going back to just going to like Bandcamp and stuff and just like buying music. So with all this stuff, Bandcamp have actually reintroduced their Bandcamp Fridays, which is like, I think it's the first Friday of every month where all sales go directly to the artists. So I think there's like a small fee or something like that is like, like just for transactions or whatever like that, but they get a huge, a much huger cut. So I would say if anyone on here is, like listening to music and the band is on Bandcamp, wait till Bandcamp Friday and then buy their music directly from them then. So, and it's like, then you have the, like you have the files, you have the MP3s or whatever like that. And also you're supporting the artist directly. And like in
I just want to clarify,
a more meaningful way than just streaming or whatever.
I just want to clarify when I say go on YouTube, like I'm the kind of guy that has like a fucking stack of CDs in my house, right? Do you know what I mean? So if you've got the music already, do it that way, innit? Do you know what I mean? Yeah, absolutely support artists.
Oh, someone saying
Neil,
there's a typo in the stream title, by the way.
I do.
Oh no!
Lion is saying there's
what's your stream title?
Amy's username in the.
Oh yeah, you missed the E out of Amy. Mule, you have a news item. Please tell us about it. I would love to hear what you have to say, DJ Mule.
Guess what? I've remembered it. It's the positive leftist news. It's actually related to what I was first talking about, which is the Amnesty International Amnesty International report into anti-Semitism. One of the coolest things that I saw one of the cooler things that I saw on positive leftist news this week, and I'm quite proud of it because it's near where I live, Manchester in the UK. A bunch of pro-Palestine activists went to the Elbit weapons factory in Oldham and shut it the fuck down.
Nice.
And this is a place now. Elbit is an Israeli company, literally specifically manufacture drones for Israel for apartheid purposes, and they shut that the fuck down, and it was great, incredible direct action. So there you go. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah, positive leftist news had some basis in other bad news, sort of bad news that we were talking about earlier. So you can still have, even though we're talking about things that are like seemingly bad, there's some good news. There's some progress with it. Always.
It's like Nat made this point. Actually, I'm just as much of my career regurgitating what my girlfriend said.
I knew it.
Elbit are doing horrific shit, and they're doing horrific shit because actually the protesting that it took to shut them down was actually pretty minimal. Like they just basically drew minor attention, and Elbit were like,
"Oh no,
get the fuck out of here!" Like genuinely, which is really good news because that means if we happen to know, which we do, where all the other Elbit sites are, we can get them all. We can get them all fucking shut down.
There's plenty of them in the UK. There are lots of them in the UK, actually.
Exactly.
Wow. This reminds me of ag laws in America, making it illegal in many states in America to film the interior of any factory farm or slaughterhouse.
Oh wow!
That's a thing because of how fucking corrupt this fucking shithole is. Anyways.
Well, it's like you were talking about Earthlings, right? Like you don't understand how people can watch Earthlings and then not be vegan in it. Do you know what I mean? I remember you talking about that.
Yeah, but I also can understand in a way, but in a really depressing kind of
Oh no, sure. Well, this is
fucking everything. We
I have a piece
we're
of
like,
news.
I'm sure there's a reason for that. I'm sure there's a good reason. I'm sure there are probably criminals. Like if people just find rationalizations for the worst things. So
yes, that's
maybe
right.
chickens are criminals.
Yeah, maybe chickens are they don't even. They're supposed to do that. They're supposed to scream.
I'm no expert in bird law, but
So the news segment is not meant to go on for half an hour, but I have a piece of news, and then we should really introduce the topic for this week properly.
Okay.
So I have a piece of news that is actually to do. Okay, well you should tell me your thing.
Well, I just want to say positive leftist news. Sophie looks very cute right now. Very
That's right.
Very positive.
Thank you very much. That is very positive.
Oh my God, she's right.
So yeah. Okay.
When
now you
she's right, she's right, and she should say it.
Very brave.
Piece of news that relates to Red Planet. It's actually Red Planet related, and it's not like a thing going on out there in the world. In a few weeks, we're going to do an episode. We need to plan when. We're going to have a planning call this week between us, the hosts, and figure stuff out and all our agenda and a bunch of other cool, actually tech stuff, which might show up in the itinerary as well. But one episode we're gonna do is gonna be to do with trans DIYing. If people in chat don't know what that is, you don't need to, because that's not what this request is for. If you know what that is, right, you can DM Red _planet_TV, because we want to know about people outside the US and UK, what the situation is for hormone therapy provision, what people do to supplement it, and people's experiences, so we can report on it, because we really want to do a thorough report, which will draw light to things. This fits perfectly into our show's raison d'etre. Okay, we're talking about ways that the state is making people's lives impossible, ways that the state is letting people down, and ways that drives people to engage in illegal activity. The comparison, I will make this comparison again a bunch of times when we do the episode. The comparison is illegal abortions. Okay, the risk of serious harm or death is much lower, but that is still the same risk at play, and it is still the same dynamic at play, where conservatives, for no scientific or humane reason, are cracking down on something, and it drives people to to other means. So if you have information about DIYing outside of specifically the US and UK, please get in touch. You will be kept completely anonymous as a source, and your DMs will be deleted afterwards. So even the other mods, after I've read through them and put them in the notes, won't see your DMs.
We won't know.
There you go.
Know.
Okay.
Right, cool.
Get in touch with us.
Do we want to get into the main thing of the show, or do we want to talk about our going over the homework from last week first? Or do we want to leave that to when we do homework right at the end?
Homework at the end.
We'll leave it to the end, right?
Yeah,
we do did people do it, and then we do the new one, right?
Yeah.
But Tim, what's interesting is that you were speaking, which means that now I'm speaking to you and asking you to read out the introduction from the notes. So now tell us about the topic.
All right, cool.
There we go.
Here we go. Introduction there. So, from ACAB to who do you protect, who do you serve, to abolish private property. A lot of leftist rhetoric and slogans can be confusing to newcomers, and issues can seem disparate and hard to follow. However, all the above ties back to the same central idea. Police exist to protect private property, because the ownership of private property underpins the state. Capitalism, economic oppression, and many of history's greatest crimes. It would be an understatement to call private property one of the most important issues anti-capitalists can educate themselves on, and today we're looking at people who engage in action that directly opposes private property. Squatters. There we go. Squatters.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that, Tim. That was phenomenal.
We get some squatting in chat.
I was writing the intro and I was imagining it in Tim's voice, and I was so glad that Tim spoke, because I was like, oh, now I can get Tim to do it. So
I've been getting lots of comments lately in my stream chat, because I stream late at night and everyone's like, it's story time hour.
Your stream is very soothing. I highly recommend tuning into, especially if you're in America. It's at a late time. It's nice to put it on and just have a friend have a very soothing bassy voice. Say things. I don't know. Compare that to my stream where I'm shrieking. Not recommended. Nighttime.
That shit's got its place, you know.
That's true.
Let's start with some
Very true.
Ones and zeros checking in chat early here today, because I want to know how many people in chat know what squatting even is. So it's a 1 if you reckon you think you could explain it to somebody else, and a 0 if you have no clue. And put whatever appropriate fraction if you want to, if you feel like, you can do whatever you
just
want.
So you know, just so everybody's aware,
seem to know.
We're not talking about the exercise.
Yeah.
We're not talking about getting some weights on you.
Now maybe that would change your vote.
If you watch Bad Bunny, you will know. What
we're actually talking about is the time-honored Slavic tradition of donning an Adidas tracksuit.
Yes.
And squatting, What do we say? What's the saying about what's the saying about squatting? I'm sure someone else knows it. Yeah, see, Nicole knows what it is. She probably knows the saying I'm thinking of now. But there's about what is it? It's about where you put your heels when you squat.
Heels on the ground, comrade found. Heels in the sky, Western spy.
There we go.
Yeah.
So to do the proper Slav squat, you got to be sitting down with your heels on the ground, so that the lines from the side of your Adidas track pants line up with the lines on the side of your Adidas sneakers.
That's
right.
Correct. Yeah. The correct squatting. The correct Slav squat.
Tragically for me, having just bought a 16-kilo kettlebell this week, doing a lot of exercise to give yourself a huge dump truck ass will not on its own abolish private property. So,
we need a new plan.
It can't hurt.
When she's right, she's right.
Because when the cops roll in and they see that ass, they're like, wait a minute.
Yeah. This has been Bad Bunny's plan all along.
This is true.
So Tim, could you tell us what squatting, which kind of squatting we are talking about this week?
Okay, so we're actually talking about the practice of occupying a space, outside of the consent of the owners, I would say, is a way to put it, because it's not always technically illegal, so just occupying a space that you don't own, someone else owns it. A successful squat usually ends up sometimes ends up in the transfer of ownership to the squatters. There's a lot of nuance depending on where you are in the world. There's different rules for it everywhere. A lot of the time there are Yeah, like they try and make it as hard as possible, but there are kind of things you can do that yeah, I mean there's protections there for people squatting, but they tend to be as limited as possible. So what we're going to talk about is going to talk about how it differs from place to place and how people have used this in the past, or successfully, or maybe even unsuccessfully. And also kind of like there's a very basic idea of just occupying up space because you need somewhere to, some shelter to live in. But then there's like a whole other, like the I would say the political realm of reasons why someone might squat a house, a business, anything like that.
I'm going to get in early with my book recommendations this time because I've got like one of the best book recommendations I could have for a topic, which is just a handbook for just how to do it. So the Squatter's Handbook, 14th edition. It's the 14th edition because they update every time there is a change to the law. This is UK specific and has to do with like what to do in the UK. But it's just basically based as fuck manual about how to squat, right? I'll just quickly go over to the notes so I can tell people about a little bit about what's in here. I know I usually just kind of I usually just kind of drop a book title and then let people go figure it out, but the ones I'm mentioning today I'm really serious about people reading, so I'm going to tell people a little bit about what's in here. The contents of this book. We got homeless rights. It goes over the legality around homelessness and why, if you're looking for a legal, the legal protections that you can get if you apply successfully and a recognized homeless status, then you can't be squatting. Basically, it's like there's a little precursor where they're just basically before you decide to go squatting, if you are homeless, blah blah blah. Property guardianship. This is a really interesting one. Basically, property guardianship is class traitor bullshit. Basically,
I wondered about that because that's not a term I'd heard before, but then I saw it in the notes and had to look through, and I was like, I can't quite figure out what this is about. So,
yeah, it might be a UK specific phenomenon, but it's basically where, in theory, a building owner, it's an abandoned building, it's exactly the kind that would get squatted in, right? But rather than wanting to pay a security guard who can't be there all the time and you have to pay them, they get people who are looking for cheaper rents to live there, in theory, for a cheaper rent, although often that's not even true. And then they basically have a job that goes in with the rent, in with the place they're paying rent for, where
taking care of the Overlook Hotel.
Oh, you literally, no, totally. That's exactly The family in The Shining are property guardians.
Okay, all right.
I was telling they were paid, right? Yes. Whereas property guardians have to pay to do it.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
In many cases, you're paying, but it's you're paying a lower rent, and then sometimes it's not even.
Yeah. Wow.
I was telling Sophie and Nat when I went to see them. Wait, was that last weekend? Yeah, it was. Yep. Oh my god, fucking hell, brain. I was telling Sophie and Nat that I went to shoot a music video once in an old fucked up mansion near Liverpool. And the guy who let us shoot the music video there basically asked us to pay him 50 quid for the day, basically. And that was what he did. He looked after this mansion. It was like an old Masonic mansion. He told us all the history of it and all this stuff. And he was like, yeah, no one owns it. It's absolutely fucked. And it was falling to bits. It was so unsafe in there. There were warning signs in certain cupboards. He was yeah, don't go in there. There's asbestos and shit like
Jesus
that.
Christ.
Yeah, it was horrific. It's one of the best videos we've ever done. Yeah, one of the best videos I've ever done. But yeah, it's an example. Yeah.
So one of the great bits in this book is here where they say, in all caps and bold and italicized, so you really, really, really can't miss it. It says, we would not recommend becoming a property guardian. And then underneath regular text, it says, if you already are one but are curious about squatting instead, brackets, saving yourself money and gaining a lot of freedom, read on and contact us for advice about changing your status. So that's really cool. But I was reading through what is in this book because I want chat to know about it. Property guardianship, First steps to squatting: finding a place, securing it. They've got like diagrams and shit for how people create buttresses, which like hold the door, the front door from getting battered in.
Yeah.
Like there is basically nothing.
This would be great, even if like you weren't squatting, it was just like zombies or something, you know. Like...
I mean, honestly, yeah, it's honestly just a survival guide. There's nothing funnier to me than a squad of pigs using their battering ram and being unable to get in a door. So that's rad.
That would be
like
funny.
Put up those reinforcements. Dealing with alarms, which is is a kind of funny gray legal thing. But if you are going to squat, it's going to something you're going to have to do. Then there's interesting legal stuff. So there's a section called "Proving it isn't residential," and this has to do with a law. Again, this is UK specific, but there's a thing called Section 144, which is basically like our biggest shift in the law to make squatting fully illegal. But what they outlawed was living in a residential building without the owners, basically when you have no arrangement with the owner, right?
Oh, yeah.
But there are 3 cases where this doesn't apply, which is really interesting and what the book opens out with. And so one is if you're squatting in a building that wasn't actually designed to be residential. Like, so if there isn't like an abandoned factory and you can make it into a livable place for a ton of people to live, then you can do that in the UK. That's completely legal. Occupying a building for purposes other than living, and actually this is something that Tim brought up before. So like something they list is protest or a social center. So that's a really interesting thing. And actually there's an example of that in something else I'll talk about, which is the Volkshuset in Copenhagen. Like like squatting in a building, and then rather than just because you need to live there, turning it into a community center is really interesting and definitely aligns with a lot of what we've been talking about on Red Planet already, like in terms of creating communities of mutual aid, like that,
the McDonald's,
the McDonald's, yeah. Like you might not necessarily need a place to live, but you and all your comrades might have places to live, but you want to create a place where you can like get together, do reading group, make stuff, distribute things to people and organize, and like that. Maybe that's a reason to squat. Moving on from that, so the section is about proving it isn't a residential building, because that's one of the ways that you can make it legal squatting in the UK. How to deal with visitors coming to the place if you're living there, and then dealing with police, dealing with security guards, dealing with owners, all sections on that. They actually have a section to do with immigration and raids, which I thought was really, really amazing.
Oh, wow, yeah, cool.
And I'll just quickly mention what it says there. It has like a little bit about like what to do if you spot an immigration raid, like a step-by-step guide where it says like tell the person they don't have to answer questions, and it's like give them useful numbers, and it has the useful numbers to give them. And then there's a section called Be Creative, which has a funny picture in it, where someone's like climbed onto the cop van to stop it from being able to be driven away, which I just thought was very charming. Like, just like, oh, be creative, do whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was
can you tell
immigration.
the title of the book again for anyone who didn't catch it the first time? Because maybe 100%. It's this.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, it's the Squatter's Handbook. Again, it's UK specific, but it is very, very, very detailed, as I hope I'm getting across. So as well as that, fixing the place up, like it teaches you how to do your wiring and stuff. Like it has a section about electricity.
That's incredible.
It has
something. A link in the chat now.
What a cool book!
It has something for like stuff to do in court, including, and I didn't know this. You are not obliged to show ID in court. You don't have to do that in UK. So if they probably need an ID, a name to refer to you in order to try a case or to do a case, right? So advice that this gives is like, if people call you some kind of nickname, it's fine to just give that, because the judge or whatever needs to call you something, but you don't have to give your ID or give your legal name, and saying I don't want to do that if they ask is fine. So
it's really fucking annoying as well when you get like so many people in the UK who love to be like, I'm a fucking sovereign citizen, you can't arrest me.
Yeah.
Like all this nonsense. And there's like actually based resources where you can like do that, but without sounding like a chump. You know what I mean? Like
when I was looking up to see cases of squatting in New Zealand, there is a person doing that. I think she's still going, doing the whole sovereign citizen thing. And she's like claiming like all these like like archaic laws that all these like legal experts are like no, just like stuff like that, and they're like no, like this thing is like a law that only applies in like fucking Scotland or some shit.
I'm trying not to. I don't want to get too derailed.
Yeah,
there is someone in the UK who like clearly has a bit of money. I wouldn't be surprised if this person's into crypto, but like is apparently a trans woman and is like a hyper libertarian. And like I first found out about her because she bought billboards around London that said your real name is not your legal name, and then like the link to her website to look into stuff. And she was promoting all this like weird like common
sovereign citizen
common
stuff?
law stuff. Like it was really interesting.
The common law stuff is a giveaway for that kind of shit, right? Like that's not saying common law. The person that I was referring to, same thing, right? Like just it's like there are things you can do to protect yourself, but that's not them.
Yeah, exactly.
It's sad because these people are running a million miles an hour, but in the wrong direction, innit?
It's like and I guess this is just a really important thing for us to establish as we go through the rest of the episode. Saying I don't recognize the law or the state is not going to really get you anywhere if you're trying to like successfully squat somewhere. Yes, you are trying to like make this thing yours and like have it be yours, right? But legally you want to use every channel that could help you. So actually trying to prove it's legal under the state's law is much better avenue.
Absolutely,
At least unless you just live in the middle of a whole neighborhood that's got squat. Like, if there's a whole block of 10 neighborhoods that have got squatted, you're basically living in the revolutionary society, and then just fucking rock on. Last
like
few things
Matrix,
that are in this book.
There's rules. There's rules, but some can be bent and broken.
It's true.
Yeah.
Last two things that are in this book: railway property, gypsies and travelers, how to deal with debt collectors, injunctions, and then it's got organizing, and it has a section on resources, which I found incredibly cool. It mentioned Green and Black Cross, as we were previously shouted out on the show. One more time, that's the Squatter's Handbook, UK specific. If you are looking to squat, this has so much fucking information, and it updates every time there's a change. So to get your hands on a copy, it's really, really cool. But I think that's I think that was my book rec. I just wanted to like my first one. I have another one, but like that's the hyper important one.
It's like it's such a good book as well. I feel like it's one of those things where it's like, even if you're not planning on squatting anytime soon, there's so much good shit in there. Even like
I learned a lot.
Yeah, I saw someone in chat saying like, oh, you got to be careful with electrical stuff and that. But their book like covers stuff about like how to repair wiring safely and doing things like that. So it's like, it's something that you probably just want to have anyway, especially like we said, if the zombies come,
I mean, to like offer a bit of an expert's opinion or whatever. Like I studied electrical engineering in university. I dropped out in the second year, but I got enough knowledge to know like what is covered here is a very safe and thorough and detailed guide. Like it's one of the thickest sections of the book. If you read through that, you are not gonna like get yourself hurt. Unless the wiring has been done wrong, and that's that's just a roll of dice for anyone doing that. So I think should we talk about a little bit about like private property as a concept? Because I feel like when Amy gets here, we're going to have a little bit more of a legal focused discussion and like kind of. But I just before that like
we should
when we're talking
I was going to say, we should go over just for everyone in chat, because I know this is something that like a lot of people get confused about, like the difference between like personal property and private property, and what private property means in relation to stuff. So sorry, I interrupted you, but go on.
Well, I just wanted to quickly say how squatting fits in very importantly with stuff we've been talking about on Red Planet for a while, which is like it fits in this closely. When I first started entertaining the idea of like, we should do Red Planet, like we should do some kind of thing that's like this, was when like patrons in my Patreon Discord were like, I understand these parts of like theory or whatever, but I don't understand how you go from the things that you start doing, like the small direct actions, to a world that's like coming together into communism.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, a lot of them are the same things. I definitely said some of this in episode 1, but like a lot of them are the same things. And squatting is like such a perfect example of that, where literally people are just taking properties that they need to live in, right? And that's why it's really important for us to cover, because we are living through yet another fucking housing crisis. I'm only 25. How many have I lived through now? A ton. Just a ton. Just so many.
Loads.
It's good. We're living through yet another fucking housing crisis, and I don't know if this one's gonna exactly end. Like, there's a really good bit in another book I'm going to recommend where they point out that, like, for the poor and working class, the housing crisis is just the normal state of things, right? So it's about the number of people who are driven into poverty. It's not just like a thing that comes and goes. It's a thing that's there all the time, and sometimes it also affects the middle class. But like, as we are living through that, it's going to be really, really important for people to know there are other options besides working, 60 hours a week and then giving all your money to a landlord who doesn't even like stop the roof from leaking directly onto your bed,
Yeah.
Cool.
So private property.
Private property.
Yeah.
Personal property.
Okay, so this is like a thing, and it's like a thing that a lot of like kind of anti-communists or just like anti-leftist in general people will talk about. They'll be like, oh man, like communism or whatever they talk about, anarchism or whatever, is opposed to private property. So you gotta like share your bed, you gotta you gotta like got your favorite mug. Well, that's my favorite, that's our favorite mug now.
Anyone could just come into your house and sleep on your bed, and that's it. That's their house now.
Yeah, exactly. Like just shit like that, which is like, so that is personal property. So things like your favorite mug, your toothbrush, all that kind of stuff, that's personal property. It's like a physical object, like whatever that you use, an individual holds onto for their own private use or whatever, like that. Your clothes, everything like that is personal property. So when we're talking about private property, what we're talking about is usually like it could be it could be land, it could be it's some kind of like a resource, a business, or like a method of generating income via via extraction or something like that. It could be like, if it's a mining company, the private property would be like the company and the tools, like the equipment and things like that.
And their land, obviously.
And the land that it's based on and everything like that.
Like,
so
if you've read the OG Conquest of Dread, the OG Peter Caprot's great work. He has a really good point in that where he says, like, all of society contributes to like invention and progress, and what we think of as like progress. And so like, if someone's made, let's take for example something that's like a huge leap forward for people, right? Like a loom. Like a loom is a huge leap forward technologically for people. If that was made, it wasn't made by a guy, right? It was made by the incremental changes of tons and tons of people who all learned the things that society had brought together as important knowledge. And so the idea of one person getting a loom and being like, this is mine, and anything that is made with it, you have to pay me just for owning it. Like, not for the labor of manufacturing it. Yeah.
This was made by the collective efforts of people that, were developing these things, thinking about these things before you even, were born or whatever like that. This is like the sum of, the working class.
I feel like a lot of people nowadays, especially conservatives, have this fear of the idea of losing their private property, because at the moment there is a what do you call it? An implied scarcity. It's a manufactured scarcity of housing, right?
Artificial.
So it's like, sure, like there's not enough houses for everyone because not everyone has the money to afford a house. But in a utopian communist future, everyone has a house, so it doesn't matter. You don't have to worry about someone coming and stealing your house because everyone's got one. Everyone's literally fucking got one. It doesn't matter.
I don't know if I'll be able to find it quickly, but there was a really a drawing in Squatter's Handbook, which is like a rough sleeper, and then like the skyline behind them, but it's made up of the words that are saying, like, the skyline is made up of the words 11 million empty properties, and then the rough sleeper is the words 4.1 million homes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's across Europe, to be clear, is what those figures are.
And I think, I was reading something earlier that was like, it's roughly about 10% of houses in America are untenanted, like completely empty. Like 10% of all houses is like wild. There's And I know in New Zealand, at the last census, there was something like 200,000 unoccupied houses, which, I mean, we only have a couple million people living in our country, so it's like 200,000 is huge for us.
That's like 10% of your
And most of them were in Auckland, where homelessness is the worst. Like which is like wild.
Which of course they were. Yeah.
Well,
this is an interesting thing. So that's like
a lot worse in those last couple, because I mean, like the last census was like 2018 or something. So.
Right. Yeah, and like this is a concept we will definitely, or I will be going on and on about throughout this episode, no doubt, which is a concept from urban geography, which is the right to the city. There was this essay by a guy called Henri Lefebvre. It's Lefebvre, which is a hell of a name to say if you don't speak French. And it was called The Right to the City. And basically it's about how how poor people made the city, just made the whole fucking, every city that exists, right? And everyone has a right to it. Very similar to what I was just saying from Kropotkin, right? It's just like everybody made this, everybody has a right to it. There's another kind of poetic piece of geography writing I really like. I couldn't find the exact quote, but like it basically describes the city as like, to human beings, the city is what like a tree with lots of nests in it is to birds, or like a warren is to rabbits. Like it is our natural environment. Like clearly we have some kind of force that makes us come together and like want to make a city, and it's not always capitalism. Like anthropologically, if you read a lot of Graeber, right, like it's not always capitalism that makes people want to come together and make a city. Human beings like to come together and make a city. And so there's this interesting idea, right? The right to the city. And I think that's something we need to talk about a lot today. Yeah. And that ties back to what you were saying earlier, Tim, that a lot of the time when people squat, they just need somewhere to live.
Yeah. And I want to also shout out that we got Lost Sue in the chat who mentioned in real land back, everyone has a house or home and much more. And so that's a thing. Like the goal of a lot of like actual real land back movements is a decommodification of land and housing. And so in some areas where various groups have actually managed to, claim back sort of ancestral land, we have seen a lot of, like community housing build. Like we've got that a lot in over here with a lot of tribes that have gotten land back through the Waitangi Tribunal. Where they have used it to build like community centers, like community housing and things like that. And it's like, I think it's really good because it kind of shows that it's like these things can be done. And like each of these, like even like these separate iwi that have made claims and done this thing have the fraction of the budget of like an actual, like a government or something like that. It would be extremely easy. Like people talk about like the costs and all this kind of stuff, but the only reason that houses cost what they do and that we're having this, like runaway housing market is because of the way that we view houses as a commodity. And that ties into everything from like, like obviously the speculative nature and stuff like that. But when they're building things, like the way that zoning laws work and all this kind of things, they're always considering like, like we have to consider the market of buyers for the amount of like what kind of housing you build and all this kind of shit like that. And it's ridiculous. And it's like
show me the market. Show it.
Yeah, exactly. Like yeah. Like all these things come back to like this market-based economy and everything like that. So I think like like a lot of people don't necessarily see the connection between like like I would say it's more people that are still on like consider themselves like progressive leftists or something like that, as opposed to people that are like communists and stuff. But I think that's like a big like that's a real I'm gonna say a red pill moment or whatever like that, when you see how all these things are connected and it's like, okay, well the only thing we can do is communism or something like that.
I think it's important to mention. Oh, sorry, go on, Soph.
Well, it's a quick thing. The way I would describe it is like it's like people think it's the market that like it's like market forces that draw people into cities, and the urbanist perspective I think could be summarized by saying no, it's humans who make cities full. It's the market that makes houses empty, right? It's only market forces that wind up with these places completely deserted.
And I just want to point out, Cradbabe says, I don't like this real land back distinction. It sort of accepts the framing of certain leftists who think land back is some and like ethnic cleansing. I think it is a distinction that we do have to make because there are liberal land back movements at the moment. There are very and it's something like the same with like decolonization stuff. Land back is becoming a buzzword, and like there are people these days that are like, like they are trading off of it without actually engaging with what it's supposed to be about and stuff. So I don't think, like I mean, the ethnic cleansing stuff is like, just a dumb Twitch meme. Like no one seriously thinks that outside of like the fucking like people
extremely
that
online
are just not to be taken seriously
assholes,
anyway. Yeah, but in the real world, like this is a thing that people are discussing. We're having these discussions in like actual between actual organizers and people like out like in the community working on these things. And it's kind of like this thing where there's a moment where you go, do we decry these movements or do we try to radicalize them to sort of thing? And
that's the thing that comes up. That's the thing that's been coming up in organizing interviews. Is like I've talked to a few different organizers who are part of groups who've been part of like much bigger organizations, like say the DSA, who like they're bigger, so they're slower moving and they're in many senses quite liberal. And so at some point there's like a splinter point where you're just like, actually, I need to get out of here.
Yeah. Like there's a lot of people that are just like, oh, we want like land back just so that we can have nice houses and then we're done, sort of thing. And it's kind of like, like no, it's like no, the whole thing is like it's all or nothing, right? Like But
nice.
Anyway, sorry, that was just I just wanted to point that out because it is something that
it's important.
Like, we have to be aware of.
That's important.
Anyway,
I was just gonna say
what were we saying?
I was just gonna say. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's important to like, so, if people are having a hard time like visualizing this about how this like, well, how can we just like house everyone? It just seems impossible. It's important to look at countries, again, I'm going to shout out Cuba, outside of the imperial core, where it's literally the rate of homelessness is 0%. There's no homeless people in Cuba. Housing is a right from the day you are born. And real estate companies are desperately trying to fuck with that in Cuba at the moment. They're like one of the only companies that are allowed to operate within Cuba. And Cuba sadly like desperately need it because it's like, fucking impossible for them to like have a decent economy. Again, an economy. They're forced to have an economy and it's impossible for them to have a decent one under the embargo. So yeah, real estate companies are trying to make this a lot harder. But housing is a right in Cuba. So it's entirely doable. It's entirely possible. It's entirely feasible. Anyone who tells you otherwise, don't bother. Like that, it's just no. Sorry, your opinion is so invalid. Like it's totally possible.
Yeah. It's it's one of the things where it's like people don't like, even though housing is a human right or whatever like that, people don't seriously consider it like that. Like they just like people like, oh, like water, of course, water, like all this, like all these things we need to survive. But it's like no, like housing is absolutely like crucial to living like like a good life or whatever.
If you don't have a house, you'll just fucking die eventually. It's how it is.
I was saying a while ago, like if we, there's always this dystopian trope of like assuming that like a super smart AI would have these assumptions built into it that are very capitalist, and that it would end up like killing us all. Like I think Tom Scott did a thing that was about like a dystopia where like an AI wipes everyone's memories in order to defend copyright or something like that. And I was saying like if you take the opposite assumption, you just start with something like fully defending someone like people's needs instead, right? You would end up with a communist utopia. Like if you can tell a little like sci-fi story where an AI is just like programmed like protect people's health, and then it ends up like giving everyone houses, giving everyone food, giving everyone not having those things is pretty bad for your health, you know what I mean? I see Amy is waiting in the waiting room.
Amy's ready.
What's the word? Bookkeeping, is that good? I don't know.
Bookkeeping, housekeeping.
There you go. There it is. Nicole, at the end of this stream, I want to play a clip that is in the notes. I will get you the link and I'll tell you the timestamp when we got to do it. But it's from a little thing I will talk about later. There's this really cool movie, and I'll talk about it later. But basically, it's really compounding just like this need for housing and just people's basic needs. And it's a really, really cool clip from a movie called Rompiendo Puertas, which I will talk about later. But shall we bring in our guest?
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
Let's do it.
We have to rearrange stuff on the overlay, of course, because I haven't implemented my fix for it. Although I do think we found a fix for it, so that's good.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's AmyeC3.
Hi.
Amy.
Amy.
Hi.
Hey, what's up?
Hi.
Oh, nothing much.
Well, Nicole is rearranging the overlay. We're having slight technical issues. So, Amy, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us, why you're here to talk to us about squatting today?
Hi, my name is Amy. I'm a housing advocate here on Twitch. I tend to talk a lot about housing policy and homelessness. Squatting does come up in conversation from time to time, especially because there's very little squatting rights here in this country. Some of the most progressive policies we have in this country is in Philadelphia, which is why I kind of wanted to talk about it, because there's been a few wins in Philadelphia that I think shows that there's a little bit more hope for activism to garner some city response that we've definitely seen in Philadelphia that we haven't seen in places like California, where there is a housing crisis, an epidemic of sorts, where affordability is becoming so difficult. People are experiencing homelessness at a rapid rate. Mm-hmm. And, looking at some progress that was made with Moms for Housing, but that was only one small instance of some sort of victory.
Mm-hmm.
I'm loving everything you're saying, but you're also throwing a lot of stuff out fast. Could you tell chat about Moms for Housing in case people don't know at all what that is?
Yeah, so Moms for Housing is actually a organization that stemmed from Oakland, California, where 4 families started to occupy a privately owned house owned by Wedgwood Properties. It's a huge real estate speculative company that looks to buy foreclosed homes for very cheap, flip them, and then put them back onto the market and make a profit from the investments that they have made. It's a very common practice that we have in house flipping and real estate speculation. Moms for Housing said, we're going to occupy this house. We have kids. We need to do what's best for them. And it was a long-standing legal battle. They even brought militarized police to respond to the mothers and the children who were staying there and forcibly remove them. Because it received so much attention, there was a lot of public pressure to make some sort of negotiation or arrangement, and ultimately it was eventually transferred. The house was transferred to a CLT, I believe. And it is now a place where Moms for Housing kind of runs their business to continue on with the work that they created. And that's great. It was a huge win.
Yeah.
But it's only one of the only examples of a win in California.
Like, for the entire process, how long were they like squatting for the entire period? Like, because I know there's a lot of laws about like how long it has to be before you can get transferred.
I believe they were only occupying the house for 2 months, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it was a very quick process where they tried to forcibly remove them. I think it's because Wedgwood Properties was looking to start the process of renovation, and the battle to reclaim the house successfully was much longer than the time they were spending under no assumption in the home.
So they just wanted to like flip it as soon as possible, and they were like, oh wow, this is actually kind of holding us up and it's getting it up.
So what actually happens is these real estate companies, they will purchase foreclosed homes, sit on them vacant they will be vacant for years. And they will kind of wait until more renovations start to happen in that area. Appreciation will start to set in on the value of the home through the land valuation process. And so they will just wait and hold off on making those additional investments, which is, expenditures coming out of their own funding for, however long it takes to kind of let the market start to have an impact on the overall value of the land before they'll start making those investments into the property. And then they'll update the property, which will also increase the value of the home that they can then resale or rent out at a higher rate than they would if they left it barren and, ill-maintained.
It's so hard not to get fucking mad right now. I just want to go, scum! Fucking
bring
scum!
me the market. Show me the market. Bring it here and show us the market. Where is it?
Yes.
No, I mean,
it's like. I was going to say, just like even when it's empty, they're still stacking equity and they're still, they're still making money off these empty properties and everything like that. And it's like, which is, I don't know. It's like, that's just so mind blowing. It's like, there's so many ways they're making money from this, It's like, it's just like, I mean, we get it over here down in New Zealand, the way that the real estate market, like the whole thing is it's just a way for people to print money, basically. It's like people are dropping investments and like everything else and just getting into just buying land. There's like even like you'll see buses go by where it'll be like, get into land banking today and all this kind of shit like that, and it's like fucking disgusting.
It's it's a lucrative asset class. There's a lot of money to be made in private property investment or investing in a real estate investment trust, which is what I would assume would be similar to a land bank. A land bank is whenever you help invest in the purchase of land for the purposes of building new housing. For example, we have a lot of these practices here with private equity firms on Wall Street or institutional investors going in with construction companies or developers to begin the process of building new housing. So they're kind of like spreading the risk between multiple shareholders.
All right, real quick. We need to take a moment because Amy came in here fucking guns blazing with all this information, but I feel like if a lot of people here don't know who Amy is, and I want to make sure we take a moment to introduce Amy properly. And also, while we have a moment, also I haven't interrupted everyone. Can chat smile? Can everyone in the panel smile? Everyone chat and smile because we're going to take a screenshot, put it on our Twitter, and make sure everyone, if you want to be on TV, you want to see yourself in the tweet chat, now's your time to look smiley. Here you go. Okay, everyone, smile. Okay, we got it. Okay, mule, terrifying.
Wow, rude. Amy, where can people find you?
Twitch.tv/AmyeC3, AmyeC3. I have housing news with AmyeC3 on YouTube. Getting ready to start a new podcast. Don't want to go into the details of that too much, but it's just a project that I have coming down the pike. And then Twitter as well, AmyeC3.
Mm-hmm. And you've been, as long as I've known Amy, I met Amy years ago. One of the few people that I've been able to touch grass with. So it's like a rare thing, and I want to make sure everyone understands.
Amy
and I have both touched grass together at the same time. Amy's
much fun, yeah.
Yeah, Amy's great. Amy's been advocating for unhoused people for as long as I've known her. Has provided such incredible education to me and others. Has really been the person that I direct my community to whenever they have questions about this stuff. And Amy has helped a few of my chatters resist evictions by making because she knows the system so well that she's able to give them the resources that they need to be able to stay housed. So I just want to personally make sure that everyone understands how very cool and based Amy is, and please subscribe and give her your money, etc., etc.
Yep. And that sounds like a great, cool, base thing to do.
Very cool, yes, extremely base and cool to give your money to Amy. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Not cringe, thank you. I can't promise that I'm not cringe sometimes, but I try to limit the cringe as much as possible. I try
whenever you're being whenever someone is being really just earnest and genuine, there's always gonna be a little bit of cringe.
Yeah,
you need to overcome the cringe. But cringe is the mind killer, right? Soph, you said that, I think.
That's it. Fear of cringe is the mind killer. Amy, you were just talking about real estate investment and land investment. And I just wanted to comment quickly, these are the direct forces that led to the 2008 financial crash. Not to leave these things as if they're wow, just the market doing what it does and a bunch of Wall Street guys make money and that's all that ever happens. Sometimes it leads to everyone being homeless and in poverty and being kicked out on the streets and a massive crash of again, bring me the economy, show me the economy. You can't. It's not a real thing. I just wanted to highlight that, right?
2008 was probably one of the worst predatory investment schemes that we have ever seen in this country. It was facilitated through the government because of the deregulations that had been occurring in the banking industry for so long, starting with Dwight D. Eisenhower even, and creating this new way from which you could make money through the stock market that led to the stock and bond trading program that became the mortgage-backed securities market. And all of this happened because of Bill Clinton's HUD program to give more people, and honestly, through HUD's implementation of programs to help low-income first-time homebuyers have access to the mortgage market, they created this whole entire system where banks just took advantage of the fact that FHA loans, backed by the governments, they were almost immediately bought by these larger investment banks. And through offering those subprime mortgages that were issued predominantly to non-white first-time homebuyers and immigrants, investment banks were able to collect those mortgages, bundle them as mortgage-backed securities, tranche them by risk, sell them on Wall Street, and then almost instantaneously, when all of the subprime mortgages with that adjustable interest rate kicked in, where no one could afford their mortgages, all of those massive foreclosures happened. And guess what? A lot of those loans that were kind of bundled with FHA-backed loans, they had to be covered by the federal government.
Yes.
And that's the reason why the federal government was like, we're just going to have to, well, partly the reason why the federal government was like, we're just going to have to, cover the entire cost of these mortgages going into default. And all of that bailout money, it didn't just go to commercial banks through TARP that covered the toxic asset losses from the banks, having all of those foreclosures. But all of the investment banks like Wells Fargo, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley Morgan. I never know. I always say the wrong word. Morgan Stanley.
Morgan.
It's like, it's a Stanley Morgan or a Morgan Stanley.
Because it's JP
they
Morgan.
Are the ones.
Yeah. Gets messed up.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And so, like, those banks played a crucial role in creating additional subprime mortgage markets through the asset-backed collateralized debt obligation, like, market. And nobody got in trouble for how predatory this was and how it led to 10 million foreclosures between 2007 and 2014. 10 million people lost their homes.
Like, I think a lot of weight is put onto the bailouts, which makes sense. Absolutely, when like there's a thing happening like that, and then rather than helping out all the working class and ordinary, people who've been preyed on, who have now lost out massively, the government was bailing out bankers, right? Like, so there's good reason emotionally why people focus on that so much. But I think that as you're saying, like, there was a situation where a lot of bankers like knew they would get those bailouts, and that led to led to a lot of the situation, because they just knew they would be fine no matter what, and really more than like they shouldn't have got the money, and ordinary people who lost out and were preyed on should have got the money. It's much more like, this should have been a massive wake-up call, and should have led to enormous reforms if they were interested in like being able to perpetuate their system and keep it going, right? And instead they did nothing. In fact, they made the situation worse. And I'm saying this because I'm trying to link it back to like what we should say on this show all the time, that the state has made massive resistance and illegal non-compliance and revolution, right, inevitable by their actions. Like, the stuff that America's done isn't unique. It's what capitalist countries are doing all over the world. And
it's happening down here as well.
Don't exactly, if you don't learn from the massive crises that you have, then you don't, then you're not going to keep your system going, because the crises will get worse.
But I think it's like the thing where like they do learn. They just learn the ways to like the people down here in New Zealand, they like the investors learn from the ways that like things happen in the States and shit. And we're seeing like pretty similar situations emerge down here, where it's like and everyone sees it coming, and like even then like we talk about it in the newspapers and everything like this, but it's just like it's like the train's on the track and it's like coming, and like everyone's like, we're gonna go off the tracks, like the tracks just stop, like we're gonna go off a cliff or something like that, and everyone, and the engineer just like looks back at us and just gives us a thumbs up.
Wait, are you saying, Tim, that there's not enough infrastructure for all this unsustainable growth?
Yeah, I know, right?
The train driver, the train engineer at the front is our politicians, and what they're basically doing is like the meme of the guys going like, but like at the end of the track, they're just like
you just
they're not gonna do shit about it. They're just like, oh, there it is, there it is. What's gonna happen? Who knows? What a fun time we're entering.
Like, isn't it weird that the train driver's wearing a parachute? Why none of us have got a parachute? Why is he got a parachute?
And it's golden. It's a golden parachute of some kind. That's so strange. Yeah, that meme. That's exactly the one. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, Nicole. You're right. The soy lads. That's right.
I think what we're going to be talking about a lot today revolves around like people's basic right to housing, and you already brought up moms for housing, so I guess I'll launch into a parallel, which is going to be to do with which will relate to the clip that I want Nicole to show right at the end of the episode. So there was a thing that happened in 1970 in New York, which I feel like telling people the history of like any kind of direct action we're talking about really helps, right? Because then you can see that actually people have done this stuff like en masse before to deal with their needs. Like people just deal with their needs when they need to deal with their needs, and you don't just have to kind of wait for the state to do something. But in 1970, in like spring and summer in New York, there was basically there was like a whole neighborhood, which very similar situation, like they were owned, like the apartments were owned, and then like I don't know if they got foreclosed or if they were just owned and people would like they were just leaving the properties empty waiting for the neighborhood to appreciate, but it wasn't. And basically what happened was, as the catalyst for this movement, a teenager died of carbon monoxide poisoning because their landlord was so shitty that they just didn't fix shit, and their kid died. And in the Puerto Rican community in 1970 in New York, they organized this massive, what they called Operation Move In, where like literally overnight, like dozens of families claimed, I think it was like 38 buildings. They just took an entire neighborhood and just lived there, right? And there's an amazing movie called Rompiendo Puertas, which is it's 40 minutes. I'm seeing if we can do a watch party in the Bad Bunny Discord. Mule, it's the kind of thing you watch on your stream all the time. It's really, really cool film. And, so when I talk about like building the revolutionary society and people just claiming a bunch of properties and like liberating them from the capitalist notion of property, and then that just getting bigger and bigger, this film is fucking amazing because there's loads of segments where people are being interviewed about like how their life is now that they've just like moved into this neighborhood, and they're just going like, when our kids, when we can't take care of, like when someone can't take care of their kids right in the moment, we have like a free office where there's always someone watching over them, and it's well heated and there's food, and that's fine. And if you need some food, there's always some food. And your kid needs their bike fixed or whatever, someone's around to do that. And I'm like, oh, so you just moved into communism, like you just did it. That's fucking amazing. Good job, everyone.
That
whips.
No, it's not communism. We were just talking about.
No, it's
communal living. It's communal.
Romulism. Romulism. That's right.
Communalism.
But it's really, really cool. And the clip I want to show at the end is just basically like it's from the very end of that 40-minute like little documentary.
What's
and it's someone who's just saying it's called Rompiendo Puertas, but I will put a link in chat, and also it's in the show notes. At the end of the movie is just this little clip where someone's just basically saying like, I don't know if we're a movement, like we just needed houses, so we just moved in. But like then starts talking a lot more hopefully about like getting the ball rolling, and it's really, really cool. So again, that's why I want to show that later. I think that meshes well with like what talking about like just a human right to housing, right? Like people need places to live, and then if there's a mass crisis of people being made homeless, people are gonna find places to live. I mean, obviously the situation, I'm speaking from the UK, right? In the US, as we saw with Moms for Housing, when you're evicted, it's like the sheriff with like tanks and fucking machine guns. So it's not, I'm speaking from a place of relative privilege, but like people will just find places to live.
Also in New York, there was a lot of Communist Party organizing in the 1920s during the Great Depression that led to the state legislature having to respond to tenant protests, and they had massive strikes where everyone in a building, regardless of whether or not they were hurting financially, they would refuse to pay rents in solidarity with those who had lost their jobs and was not able to pay their rent. And so there was a lot of working class coalition building in New York, and a lot of those organized efforts were rooted in housing during the 1920s and 30s, led directly by the Communist Party. So in New York, there's always been a little bit more, I guess, of tenant organizing efforts that have led to more protections than other U.S. cities. And that has made it a lot easier, I think.
Someone in the chat said that earlier.
Yeah, I was going to say, Chloe, my mom said that earlier, that in New York City, they're like, squatting is, I don't know if it's legal, but there's certainly like more protections. And I was like, that surprises me, because I think New York City stop and frisk, absolutely, like Rudy Giuliani. I don't think of any of that, but like what you're saying is really, it's really interesting. And I also want to make sure that everyone understands that when you see a president like FDR doing a thing, FDR didn't do the thing. Communist socialists organized, forced him. And what Amy is saying is communists organized and forced certain things to be what they are. So whenever
like
you see these, go ahead.
Direct action led to the pressure that codified into law their protections or what they were fighting for.
Like in the organizing interview I published this week with Common Humanity Collective, something Joe highlighted was that like the Black Panthers, like just giving food to kids was like what led to like programs to actually, like there were no programs before that to like make sure kids got food if they needed it. And it was like, it's, as Malcolm X said, power only respects power, right? So you have to build some kind of power where you're organized and you're doing something. And that's when politicians will respond by being like, well, we better make sure that like, they don't have that power and we have that power. So again, when we're talking about dual power, like something the system will do sometimes is try to pass, right? To use language we've covered already in the show, pass non-reformist reforms, right? To give people stuff as you build dual power, because then they can't say, then you can't say you're giving it to people. They can say they're giving it to people. But it's absolutely not FDR or whoever. It's always on the ground organizing.
Yeah. And I love that whole like the like a lot of people think like solidarity is just like like seeing something happening and being like, yeah, I support that or whatever. But like these people who literally were like they were fine, they were paying their rent, they were doing okay, but in solidarity with their like their neighbors and things like that, they
didn't pay rent.
And they took that risk on them, even though they like they had like they could have just wrote it out, they could have been sweet, and they could have for their own like they didn't have to do anything. No one like no one would have been the wiser or whatever. They could have just kept paying rent, kept to themselves or whatever. But that's that's not solidarity, and that's not that's not how this shit gets done. It's not just the people that are really hurting or whatever like that. It's like everyone standing in solidarity to them. And I think that's really important for a lot of communists, leftists, whatever you want to call yourself. It's like you gotta like if you see another struggle happening that doesn't necessarily directly affect you, even if like it's one of those things where it's like you don't necessarily see what the end point is. And I see this like a lot with people not kind of getting a lot of like indigenous struggles and stuff, especially down here and stuff. Like, I mean, I see people on Twitter being like, oh, I don't want to like like they'll see like something like a Maori or doing something, and they'll be like, oh, I don't really know what they want, I don't know what the end point is or whatever like that. But then you get like you'll go to an action or whatever like that, and there'll be all these like Marxist Leninists that'll show up, and they're just like, no, we're here because like we're here because
they're like the end point is actually communism.
It's interesting you say that, Tim, about like some people not necessarily seeing the end result of their solidarity and stuff in some cases. There's a great film that I want to shout out that we watched in my Discord last night called Ne Passaran, which is about some Scottish engineers who worked in a Rolls-Royce factory in East Kilbride in the 70s, around the time of Pinochet's regime, who simply refused to send jet engines to Pinochet's regime. 50 years, however long it is, 50 years later, in 2018, the documentary filmmaker interviewed some people who literally did not die because of their actions.
Yeah,
incredible.
And so like that's just wanted to fucking shout that out, because that's a sort of great example.
Exactly, yeah. Solidarity should be material. I think there's a lot of people who stopped saying thoughts and prayers and started saying solidarity, and it's like
exactly.
Right.
I wanted to say about the rent strike. There was a lot of talk of rent strikes at the start of the pandemic, and actually London Renters Union, who my partner's very involved with, and I've been involved with a few times. And I interviewed someone from there for the first organizing interview. They asked around everyone who was a member, like, would you be interested in being involved in a rent strike? And it was kind of an interesting thing, which I think is a transferable lesson across organizing, where like people weren't as into it, but there were like way more people were into it if you said, if there was a rent strike happening, would you do it? And they were like, fuck yes. They were like, if there's a rent strike happening, I would absolutely not pay my rent. Whereas as opposed to like, oh, would you like stand up to your landlord individually? Which like is the point, right? It's like alone we don't have, what force on earth is weaker than the feeble might of one, right? Like
anyway,
I always think
derailed that a little
Simpsons
bit.
quote about when we stand together, we are a mighty F word.
Yes, exactly. I sure am. Anyway,
same.
So, so Amy, you were telling us about. I feel before all the derails, you were telling us about Moms for Housing. Did you finish talking about that, or do you have more to say?
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think there's a lot of good examples we can pull from in California, to be honest. We've seen a lot of violence at the behest of the state, kind of directing cops to, act with impunity and, forcibly remove people from state-owned properties. That is just heartbreaking, and I'd rather focus on good work that has been done that has led to actual wins than kind of
that will end up
will
end up giving people in those situations hopium, right? And not just hopium, but like examples of praxis that like maybe they can twist to help them in their situation, which is a bit more dire, right?
Yeah, the psychological warfare against squatting, against striking, I think is extraordinarily profound and needs to be addressed. And it's like, for instance, thinking that there's no hope, there's nothing's ever going to change, no one's going to stand with me, and even if they did, it wouldn't work, and whatever. And this is a lot of the reason, in my opinion, we were talking about this earlier, I think today on stream, or maybe yesterday, about why the establishment tries so hard to make sure that Bernie Sanders wouldn't be elected. I think that largely is because that would show that, hey, when we get together and do a thing, we can actually do it, and things can actually happen, and it gives you that little bit of spark of hope, or a big spark of hope. I know that Noam Chomsky, we talked about this last Red Planet, said that Bernie Sanders was a success because of what he's inspired, even if he didn't win. I think that hopium, that hope, that positive, like actually seeing that you can do shit, because they're so used to watching the news or watching politicians and be like, that's what they do, and we're just the audience that just watches and just experiences whatever the fuck they want to launch at us. So yeah, I think that focusing on these positive things, focusing on, hey, when it like we can actually change things, we can actually like just live here without paying rent if we organize. I think that is potently effective, because I think we don't oftentimes provide enough focus on how psychologically like impotent a lot of us feel about doing something, about like being able to enact change. Let me do a quick check-in with chat. I wonder if there's a way that we could ask this question of chat, because I want to know how do we ask. I don't know if the host or Amy can help, but I want to ask a question of chat that asks basically like, do you feel like change is possible for you? But I know everyone's gonna press 1 because they want to be like good little student. But so this is a hard one to really like ask. But basically, let me just be honest with y'all. I still have a lot of insecurities with regards to like standing, especially in America, standing in front of the police when they're armed and they're trying, they can like point their gun at me and I'm standing alongside other people to try to like defend, say, a family's right to squat in a house. That still, to me, seems like a really scary, really like, I don't want to say hopeless, but I have a hard time. It feels very like, oh, that would be awesome if I did it, but also, but that's like a different person. Like I don't, it's hard for me to imagine doing that because I feel like so psyched out as an American, especially as like being involved in for a bit in the Black Lives Matter protests in Seattle, where there was like immense police brutality and like witnessing that, and just that's I think the biggest harm. It's not like the tear gas, and stuff. I think it's like the psychological effect that it just makes you want to cower away and just be like, no, you're right, I can't do anything, we can't do anything. Even all of us linking arms couldn't possibly do anything against a handful of police. That's the psychological shit. And so yeah, what I'm trying to go back to after this segue is to just highlight how important what Amy is saying is, that focusing on these wins is extremely crucial, and not like focusing on any sort of like misses, if you will. Yeah, so like Squirrel says, in all honesty, I've seen so many people abused by the system that it's paralyzing and I feel hopeless so often. Right. And I don't think that makes you a bad leftist. I think that makes, or anything, because that is the intended effect of the system. And I think we have to be honest. We have to be honest with how we feel about this so we can address it. This like kind of toxic I think there's like certain like toxicity, you know, there's like positive, like there's like a toxic positivity and stuff. I think there's some version of toxicity with regards to refusing to acknowledge this psychological warfare, because then it makes you maybe look weak or you're like not legit or whatever. But I think it's important that we do, because a lot of us, I think that's probably the thing that's standing in the way between us and like organizing or squatting or whatever. So yeah, I appreciate your honesty. Yeah, exactly. Match and Marx is. A lot of BLM activists saw the ugly side of the violent state. Many were left with PTSD too. Yeah, when we had Anansi on our stream a few Red Planets ago, we were talking about strategies and tactics when we are protesting strategy and tactics. I think was the title. I forget, but it was protest and riot tactics. Yeah, protest and riot tactics. Yeah, right. Anansi opened up to us about trauma they experienced by cops, and it was like, you're not wrong. So that serves to psychologically suppress not only the person but any onlookers when these events are televised. You're like, wow, well that happens when you stand up to them. Okay, well, and I know that my American viewers and Amy can relate to living in America, where cops are absolutely tremendously ruthless and without any sort of like checks. It's scary. And so I just wanted to make sure that we had a moment to check in about that. And that's why it's so important that we organize, because it is possible, but we organize and we focus on wins and we make sure that we don't get psyched out, because the intended effect is to psych us out, and we cannot let that happen.
Well, bravery is not necessarily not being scared, is it? It's about still being scared, but just being clever enough to know that what you're doing is to stop other people from being.
I think there's different ways you can find it, but I think it's a great definition. Yeah, or like
right.
Yeah, yeah. I like that a lot. Teak, thanks for giving yourself to Master of the Art. That's very kind of you.
That's not mine, by the way. That's some book that I read years ago. I can't remember what it is.
You're one of those. You're one of those book readers. Oh.
Well.
Okay. I think we said this on the like resisting the black pill, having hope episode, right? But like one way that you deal with fear is to just learn about the way that things actually are, and I think that's like what we should do with squatting, because I think that the point I've been trying to get across, like there are going to be people who just need places to live, and squatting is something that they're going to turn to, especially because we should make this distinction. If you stay in a place after your landlord tries to kick you out, you're squatting. Like once you no longer have the owner's permission to be there, you're squatting, right? And like, so I just want people in chat to kind of understand that, like, people say this thing about like you're never more than a month's paycheck away from homelessness, but like we need to get across to people, a lot more people, that like just staying in the place you're in is a possibility. Like that's what we were talking about with the rent strike, right? Like solidarity with people who couldn't pay their rent was the fundamental part of it, right, Amy? Was I misunderstanding in that story?
Yeah, and that was just a very common practice where a lot of working class coalitions were built because there was a sense of community that kind of existed in the inner city area where predominantly non-white people did tend to live due to segregation, and a common struggle that they had as victims of, oppression from in multiple ways through multiple facets led to a fundamental understanding that they were the ones who were missing out on some crucial financial aid that was given to predominantly white working class folk. And it was through that understanding that there was a need to stand in solidarity that led to organizing and discussions. And through their efforts, I believe that it was a way to garner the support of those who weren't necessarily experiencing the same economic related precarities, but the only way they could have been able to pull off these massive wins through entire buildings forming a rent strike would be to have those conversations or have that close-knit community already there that would allow the process of joining in solidarity to really ensue. So that's the difference between now and then. I believe a lot of it comes down to the way that our communities have been designed in the mid-century, kind of after the Great Depression and the World Wars. We started to see this new wave of building, and atomization was central to the way that we started to build out new communities in the suburbs, for example.
Is this going to finally be the week where we tell people to go out and meet their neighbors? I feel like it could be.
We've been doing
it
every week, honestly, but like, let's do it. Let's officially do it, I guess, is the homework.
Admitting hands up, Red Planet chat, we have not figured out the homework yet. I was going to ask Amy, since she probably has the best idea of what could be like direct support you could give to like local squatters. But I've been saying for a while, we got to do a homework that's just go out and meet your neighbors and try to build local community. This might be the week. Well, the first week where we say that. We're going to definitely say it a bunch of times. I think so. There's an interesting conversation, I think, to be had about reproductive labor, because something common between what I was talking about with the people documented in Rampiado Puertas, the Operation Move-In, sorry, that was what it's called, their movement, and Moms for Housing is that women of color who are parents were the driving force. And I think it's interesting to have a conversation about reproductive labor, right? Because for those who aren't familiar, reproductive labor is a Marxist concept, which is like the labor that goes into reproducing the system and reproducing the people who like work in the system, right? So like raising children is labor, right? Absolutely. Teaching children is labor. Keeping up a household is labor. All of this is labor, and it usually doesn't get appreciated because it's unpaid labor a lot of the time. Typically. And because women do it. And well, there's an overlapping thing where like women are made to do it unpaid, and then it's not appreciated, both because it's like not taken seriously, and that's why women do it, and then also because women do it isn't taken. It's just self-reinforcing thing, right? And so there's a lot of stuff like even in the OG, right? Like even in like Engels' writing about like the origins of Marxist feminism, where he's actually like talking about reproductive labor. And I think it's really interesting to see that in like traditional trade unionism, right? Like there's been a sense of like unions being a boys' club or whatever, right? Where it's like male-dominated industries. Like I think even now our classic example of a union, like a lot of people's minds still go to like miners or something, or like dock workers or something, where it's like a bunch of like burly dudes doing men jobs, right? And then when you have the union for it, it's also those same guys, the ones organizing. And then what's interesting, I think, is to look at something that is effectively organizing about reproductive labor, right? People's, like when you talk about a rent strike, for example, that is organizing that revolves around reproductive labor, because it's around your household and your ability to live, right? If we look at like the fully systemic view of this, right, where people live and how they live is it falls into the category of like the reproductive aspect of capitalism, where it's trying to like where people need to have their needs met in order to keep living at all. And then if you're going on a rent strike, it's organizing around that side of life and that side of the system. And then I think it's really interesting to see that squatting often revolves around families. And so I wanted to read from, here's my second book, Rec. It is The Autonomous City, A History of Urban Squatting by Alexander Vasudevan. It's a really good book. I really, really recommend this one. Fantastic for learning about the history of squatting, like not just in one country, but around the world. And in talking about Operation Move In, Vasudevan says, as Rompiendo Puertas, however, shows, this is ultimately a squatters' rights movement that was largely organized and executed by working-class Puerto Rican women. Like it's a huge thing that it's like the different to like I think a lot of people's preconceptions about even this kind of thing, because when we're talking about like in the Squatter's Handbook, for example, like the step-by-step is kind of framing things as like, find a place, break in there, get in there and do the security, and here's how you deal with the cops and whatever. And it's actually like, realistically, like if you're talking about a mass movement of squatting, you are talking about families necessarily. And so who are you talking about kind of organizing that? It's often women. And I think that, so this is a quote as well from Autonomous City. If you want the title again, it is... The Autonomous City, A History of Urban Squatting by Alexander Vasudevan. And the quote is about the movie Rompiendo Puertas. By defining the city as a space built by and thus in a fundamental sense for poor people, by asserting that the seizure of abandoned apartments is a morally justifiable and politically legitimate form of activism, Rompiendo Puertas depicts a radical politics of place that challenges the economic and political forces shaping the post-war urban city. So I thought that meshed really well with what you were saying, Amy, about like the post-war urban city specifically, right? It's like it's that kind of building that was done that leads to like building that emphasizes alienation, because alienation isn't just a byproduct of capitalism. It's actually how capitalism gets a lot of stuff done.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also makes it really difficult to organize, especially if you're in a siloed neighborhood, in a siloed building. There's not a common place. There's not a real place for camaraderie, and that's not by accident. That's in fact by design.
Thank you for saying that.
I was talking to.
I was really quick. Thank you for saying that, because I was it reminded me of a thing that I forgot, because I want to say it before, because the nuclear family model I think fits really well into this atomization and patriarchal oppression, as well as a lack of just basically a way of throwing a wrench into community building. When you have a father, mother, kids in one place, and they're supposed to keep to themselves, and we keep it in the family, and you never air your dirty laundry with anyone, and if the father
don't talk about
wife,
politics at the dinner table.
Don't talk about politics. And the father beats the wife. This is a thing that we deal with here, or it's all under the husband. Or this is not always the case for every nuclear family, by the way. But like the nuclear family model is traditionally this. It's a little miniature, fragile, patriarchal like kingdom that is atomized away from every single other one, and then you don't have a community. You just have a bunch of small little kingdoms that are all kind of like living amongst each other and just like looking at each other's cars and who bought they bought an SUV. I didn't know that the Millers could afford an SUV, blah blah blah. This is especially true for like what I'm seeing, what my mom is going through right now. And I told my mom to catch the show, and I don't think she's watching, but if you're watching, Mom.
Oh wait, shit, hang on. Shout out Nat's mom. Nat's mom is probably watching. She watched the previous one. Special viewer. Hello, Nat's mom. Hey.
Hi, Nat's mom.
Hello to Nat's mom. Hi, Nat's mom.
Sorry about the derail.
No, you're fine. You're fine. But my mom has been so my mom is retired. So she used to be an educator working with students as a high school counselor. Now she's retired. She's single. Her kids are moved out. Now she's alone in her home, and it's COVID. So no one's like seeing each other, and she's trying not to like interact with each other because she's like a pretty high risk. But there's nothing she has no community, and she's like really suffering from it. And I was telling her, I'm like, Mom, this is, a lot of people try to like pretend that this is like their own personal problem, like they're experiencing something personally like a failure, but it's not. It's a lack of community, because this is how our society is structured. It's structured in such a way that it helps to enable the worst things and helps to alienate us, so we can't speak to each other and open up to each other and feel vulnerable we were having this conversation earlier in the stream about like how people with depression oftentimes feel like burdens when they're sharing something with another person. It's like, I'm not going to elaborate too much on this, but earlier in the VOD, if you want to catch that conversation, just watch my VOD from today when we had a long talk about what goes into this. Anyways, all I wanted to say is squatting and tenant unions is like a radical shift away from that nuclear family model. It is aggressively like forming a community so that people can have housing, and we're not going to view housing as every single person needs to establish it for themselves, and if you can't, that's your dirty little secret that you can't share with anyone else. We're building like solidarity amongst people living in, you know, similar areas typically.
Well, yeah.
And I just wanted to express that like the roots of this problem go far beyond just the shift of money from one hand to another. It's like a very deep, it's now very much ingrained in like a lot of the culture that surrounds capitalism and home ownership, or lack thereof sometimes, and how families are constructed, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like a whole thing, and fuck nuclear families. The nuclear family model is fucking horrible.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's
That
interesting
was
on like, oh, sorry, Tim.
I was just going to say, the traditional Maori family structure was like very open and kind of communal, and so it's like the traditional kind of like living structure, and that was like a key part of the way that the state kind of undermined Maori communities was by splitting up families and things like that. Directly, like, you know, they were literally like, these people are living in communism, like, you know, like how actually I think they said it was like beastly communism they called it, and
God, of course,
yeah, and so which is kind of an interesting thing to see because these days, as more iwi and hapu are getting treaty settlements, and they are able to kind of like start developing their own, you know, like the communal land. There is a move back towards like, you know, like creating community spaces. Yeah, like I was saying earlier, like whether it's housing, community spaces, like even like educational facilities, like, you know, like what we call wananga, which is like a small, you know, like a school kind of thing or whatever. And it's like, you know, like this kind of shift back to the traditional way, and the only thing that was standing in the way was I guess like the lack of capital, right? You know, like the land being taken away, not having any money, and even in a lot of areas where they were able to hold on to some portion of land, it's still like you can't borrow money communally to develop land. You can, you know, which means that communal, like land that is owned communally by an iwi, a tribe or whatever, is like, you know, you there's no way to develop it unless you already have like the capital or whatever. So yeah, I think that's like a huge thing that I mean, I know we've got like a bunch of indigenous people from all around the world that and that, you know, that watch and, you know, like participate in the show and stuff, and I'm pretty sure like I've heard similar things from other people like over in America and stuff about the same way where it's like the nuclear family was like the model and all the things that come with it, you know, like what you know, like the way that, you know, like even like the way that you pay taxes and all these things, how that's tied into like who's in your household and all that kind of stuff. Like these are all things that kind of undermine a lot of traditional ways to live.
Yeah,
that's really dope. Like
it's like formally the state's like we are enforcing nuclear model family like model.
Oh yeah, like like legitimately, like they broke up families and stuff. And like another thing is that we're still dealing with, and like kind of blew up even just like last year, there was a huge thing about the state taking children, and the whole thing is like so the traditional way is that like if you have kids, like the family's like a horizontal structure sort of thing like that. So if like, and this is like what happened with like my dad, like he had like a brother who was just given to my grandma's sister, you know, sort of thing, like just like the way that adoption is kind of handled inside the family. It's called whanga, and it's like that is considered technically illegal. So what the state does, or like you know, like the agents of the state or whatever, is they go in and they say like, this child isn't living with its mother on paper, and you know, or whatever like that. So it's coming with us now. And it was like basically like people were just getting like, you know, it's like people just showing up in the house one day. Yeah, exactly, and abducting children and stuff. And it was a huge thing on the news over here and everything like that. There was like all these big exposés and like people literally filming it, like people just showing up one day and being like, "Okay, we're taking your children," you know.
Oh my god,
and
that's a huge thing that like
it's fucking wild.
Colonizers do, right?
And the worst thing for me is that this was like Child, Youth and Family. Was the historic agency, but they had recently rebranded it and then basically like we call us like, you know, like there's different names for it and stuff, like people can say like native washing or whatever like that, you know. So they had renamed it as Oranga Tamariki, which is like a Maori name, and like, you know, the whole process, all this kind of thing like that. It's just like so disgusting.
Fuck's sake,
and,
that is disgusting.
So
yeah, but this is like another thing as well, you know. It's like and a lot of these families, even if they do live in separate houses or whatever, there is like a communal like structure to living, you know. And it's so it's just shit like that where it's like this isn't just something that is like an informal thing. Like this is something that is reinforced by the state, you know. Like this is what a family looks like to the state, you know.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting, like if we're talking about like building projects like urbanization and suburbanization and siloed housing, like Amy mentioned before, those are this is about to be pure derail. I will try and keep it as concise as possible. But a really weird thing happened to me and Mule last weekend. We were going around London and we were grabbing lunch. So we got lunch from a place where you got to pay money to get the food, and then we took the food to a place which is like a little courtyard full of burger vans, right? So it's like the only spaces where you have any kind of like communal space at all, where people can just be and that's just fine, right, is one where you're assumed to have been paying money. And obviously like loitering laws, right, exist. So in other words, making it like illegal to be in this space if you didn't pay money for too long, right? And I was saying to Mule how like through you know, if you read Simulations and Simulacra, Baudrillard talks about this, the way that things will be recuperated and repeated over and over again to like the image of the thing, right? But like it loses all meaning. And so you get spaces like this that are technically communal, but they're like a simulation of communal spaces, right? The way that people would like to live. People would like to live in a village, in community with each other, or in a city, like absolutely, but with communal spaces where they can all just hang out and like gossip about stuff and fucking chill and smoke the good leaf and whatever, right? And instead, we got this place which is hyper-capitalist, and you can only be in if you're spending money, and you will be evicted from if you're not spending money. And it's a simulation, right? That's what the book is about.
Don't get me started on roads, by the way. Don't get me started on roads.
And then
all that shit. Sorry, I'm just yelling at Rob.
And then we were sitting there at the table, and we looked up, and there was a mural, but not a mural that a graffiti artist had done, but one that a company, I think, what was it, Gucci, right? Had paid,
Gucci.
Had paid graffiti artists to do, and it was an ad, and in the ad there was a copy of Simulations and Simulacra on the table, like in the painting that like is a recuperation of street art by Capital to like commodify public art in order to sell Gucci, right?
Yeah.
There was a fucking copy of Simulations and Simulacra right after I was just saying that to Mule. It was the craziest fucking thing.
So I was walking around London with the Matrix girl, and we were talking about shit in the Matrix and how it relates to real life. We sat literally in the fucking Matrix.
I was right there going like, Mule, understand
taking
this.
The piss
we
out
live
of
in a simulation. I was just like across the lunch table from Mule being like, we literally live in a simulation. Like a simulation is this, right? This is a simulation of things that we live in a simulation. And then there's this fucking thing right there. I was like, oh, damn,
I came out the goo.
Maybe we live in an actual
simulation at that. You live in a gentrified simulation.
For real.
That's the thing, right? It's like a lot of people think if you say something like, oh, we live in a simulation, they're thinking about like literally like
Elon Musk
you're living
in garbage.
Well, they think that you're talking about a literal, like, you're plugged into the Matrix and like that there is a computer-generated image. But it's like, no, it's like there is a society that we live in, and then there's, like, the projection of the society that, you know, that like, people think they live in. It's like, this is this projection, that's a simulation. That doesn't exist. Like, that's the society we just think, that, you know, that the way that it's sold to us.
It's a little closer to, like, the Truman Show, right? Like, the Truman Show would be closer Approximation, that movie, if you watched
Sure.
it.
I don't think I've watched it.
Oh, really? So
I think
I know
the Truman Show is
but
better for kind of understanding the way that like the Truman Show is a little bit prescient. I feel of like influences, right? Just someone who has to just like sell their entire life for money, right?
Yeah.
But I this is like all of this like refiguring of community, and what you were saying, Nicole, about like the nuclear family and how that helps to reinforce alienation is why I've been like on a real kick recently of saying that like what we need most is to radicalize moms. Like we need we need based moms around the world, because that's what's going to bring about the revolution, is just like just a bunch of moms, because like we're all caught up in this fucking nonsense about like how to debate your uncle so hard he shits himself at Thanksgiving. But like the thing is, there's like a person at that table who can already make him shit himself just by saying "shut the fuck up, Stephen," and that's his mom, right? Like we need to get moms on side, is what I'm saying. But this is the point I was trying to get at about like it's families. When you're looking at a mass movement of squatters, like don't imagine this is all Antifa super soldiers breaking into abandoned buildings to redacted the white property developers. It's families we're talking about,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that
I don't know how much that speaks to your experience, Amy, but
in terms of how any movement that we have seen in the last couple years is the direct result of a massive real estate takeover by Wall Street, because they found a way to capitalize on the entire subprime mortgage collapse. And our struggles as renters are reaching new heights because we are now beholden to the same mercy of our landlords, but our landlords happen to be Blackstone or other private equity firms that are not at all interested in the reason why you can't pay rent. You will just experience eviction. So what I think is really interesting too, to talk about the way that massive swaths of people, dispersed throughout the entire country, are experiencing eviction, and how we've started to see, especially in California, this new move to create informal settlements, the kind that you would see in Mumbai. Yeah. Roughly 1 billion people live in slums anyway. I know that's a dirty word, so I try to use informal settlements in discussing the subaltern class, which is really broken down very well by Ananya Roy at UCLA. She has translated a lot of Gramsci to her own way of describing the subaltern class and the informal settlements. That is the direct result of those who were either resisting neocolonialism or outright rejected from society, because neocolonialism only covers so much ground in providing natives with an opportunity to integrate into the new iteration of society that the colonizers rather have created. And that has led to a massive number of local residents who have lived there their entire lives displaced at the hands of colonizing. And neocolonialism in the form of gentrification is becoming, I think, a little bit more, it kind of hit the mainstream. It's kind of like a meme concept, but it really does tell a lot about where people are right now in experiencing displacement or getting priced out, because there is a new owner who is raising rents. And during the pandemic, rents in the last year has gone up in some cases by like 30-40%, depending on where you are in the world or in the country. And that is quite telling of a future that could come if there is no appropriate response to the growing number of people who are getting priced out because they can't afford to pay the rent that is, arbitrarily set, and the consequences of not paying your rent is to be forcibly removed.
Yeah. It's illegal. Well, it's illegal to not have a job. Like if you can't pay your rent, eventually cops show up and try and remove you. It's illegal to not work, and I feel like there's a name for a system where it's illegal to not work. But anyway, I don't want to get crass. But yeah, I think
we'll get banned for that if you mention it. Like the way Twitch is.
Yeah. I don't want to actually accidentally like pop off and say the C word or something. No, I think that's super fascinating, Amy. That's really, really interesting. Who was it you said who's been doing the translating Gramsci?
Ananya Roy, UCLA. She has the Inequality Project at UCLA. She also is playing a crucial role in having these conversations about the proliferation of unhoused individuals taking matters into their own hands and creating these informal settlements. You'll see a lot of them in Oakland, California, and various parts of Los Angeles. In fact, that's kind of how Skid Row became Skid Row, where unhoused encampments started to form, and the city just kind of like surrendered a part or a block of the city to the unhoused instead of giving each individual the opportunity to have permanent supportive housing. They just decided to allow this entire group to congregate and have what might be considered self-determination, but they are still subjected to awful treatment and lack of resources and no real agency. The number of people who die per day in Los Angeles if they are experiencing homelessness is up to 5 people a day. So that's more than that's more than any other city. That's more than New York, more than in Seattle, for example. And so yeah, it's becoming really problematic to see how more and more people are experiencing homelessness. Sometimes they're still working, they're employed, they're just literally priced out of their homes. So there's actually quite a high number of people who are continuing to work while experiencing homelessness in LA County.
Yeah. It's
so it's not like they're not productive members of society. They are. They are doing everything right. They're not doing anything wrong.
not that you should be made homeless for not being productive, right? Like, disabled people, elderly, children. Exactly, yeah, and that's why the social contract should be ripped into little pieces, and I should eat it.
Yeah.
We have a problem with that over here as well, because the rental costs have gone way up, as well as the housing prices and stuff, and there's been just people. Initially started seeing these stories about people living in garages, people renting them out as well. Like 4 or 5 families to live in, and then it's the stories started coming out of people just living in cars, and that's been a thing, and even through the lockdowns with COVID and stuff like that, there were like people living in their cars, and there's people still going to work and doing their jobs and everything like that. They have kids that go to school and stuff, but they just sleep in their car, and it's like that's for a little while. Like it seemed like for a while it was such an unavoidable issue that something was going to happen, but it's like one of those things, like it's just like they get a bunch of clicks off it, they put it in the newspaper for a little while and stuff like that, and then something else happens and they move along and people just kind of get left behind. There's like a bunch of groups that have done a lot of good work in that area, but it's like one of those things where it's like it's all so tied in at the moment, especially like with our housing market and how fucked it is, that to even like get these politicians to actually talk about it, like they just like they won't even bring it up, or like a huge thing was a capital gains tax for us, because of the like it is the average house goes up in value by so much every year at the moment that people are making just huge amounts of capital gains. So we were going to bring in a capital gains tax, which we don't have, so that all of this additional untaxed income, they would actually have to pay some tax on it, and it would be less.
So did you bring it in?
Well, so the thing is, we did a referendum on it, and it was it looked like it was like a non-binding referendum, and everyone was like, yes, do the capital gains tax, because obviously there's like a lot fewer landlords than there are normal people. And then the government looked at it and said, well, we've listened to the people and we've decided that it's not the right time to do a capital gains tax. And then you like look at all these politicians, and they're like, their real estate portfolios are huge. There's like a couple. I mean, we're a small country. We don't have that many people in parliament, but there's like ministers that have like over 200 properties and things like that.
Jesus
it's
Christ.
like, of course they're not going to vote against their own interests.
Yeah. We had a thing. Had a thing a few years ago now, which like people in the UK know this instantly by the word Grenfell. But basically, what happened was that there was a housing tenement block called Grenfell, Grenfell Tower, which because it had cladding on the outside, which was highly flammable and had been highlighted multiple times to the owners that was not okay and like not safe, and to the council as well, and just been completely ignored by everybody. And then there's this huge fire where like dozens and dozens and dozens of people died, and all the survivors had nowhere to live because their houses fucking burnt down. And there are people who are still homeless now whose house got burned up in the Grenfell fire, and like they don't do shit about it. I was going to say what you were saying about like people renting out small spaces is one of the sickest elements of like capitalism today. Is like at the same time you will have like, we talk a lot about GRT people like trying to live nomadically who live in a caravan or whatever, and they are horribly stigmatized, and police show up to try and evict them everywhere they go, and like there's horrible racism against travelers. And then at the same time a whole ton of places, like including like architecture magazines and shit, will be like, check out this new trend of micro homes. It's so innovative, ways that people are disrupting the real estate market by creating tiny housing. And it's just like fucking, you going this hard after travelers. Also, I mean, at the same time, this is a point I wanted to bring up earlier. In the Autonomous City, Alexander Vasudevan brings up like in the introduction Folkets Hus in Copenhagen, which like they were squatting there to use it as a community center to like bring people together and just like have a community space, like a real community space, not a simulation of one. And it was a squat, and the police in Copenhagen used a counter-terrorism unit to get them out, like dropped in by helicopter onto the roof, used quick cement to seal all the doors so none of the squatters could escape prosecution, and like tear gassed the entire building. Like so deeply fucked. And I feel like that shows incredibly well how threatening squatting and other challenges to private property are to the system.
Yeah, like they literally just fucking did a Judge Dredd on them just for living in an empty building, you know? It's fucking ridiculous.
Exactly.
And that's like the thing, right? It's like you can see by the disproportionate response how threatening it is to the status quo, you know? Because like if a bunch of people just start squatting and they do it successfully, and then people start reporting on it, then other people are going to see it and be like, oh shit, like they just did that. And then, you know,
that's what I'm saying about like
before,
the growth of the revolutionary society. Genuinely, a ton of people, when asked if there was a rent strike going on, would you do it, are like, fuck yes, of course I would. They would just live in their house without paying rent. And if living in a rented accommodation without paying rent, unless that's just with the landlord's permission, is squatting, or and just like taking the housing that you need to have. There was I want to read another really quick quote in this book, which I really, really liked, which was
and then after that, I want to
do with what I mentioned
for chat. So
sure. Something I mentioned earlier, which was, and then hopefully maybe we can move on to a kind of discussion of like how to support squatters, because I feel like that's something that we should like grab this conversation towards.
100%.
So this is to do with what I mentioned earlier, Henri Lefebvre's concept of the right to the city, right? So according to the investigative journalist Robert Neuwirth, it is in fact squatters who give some reality to Henri Lefebvre's loose concept of the right to the city. They are, quote, they are excluded, so they take, he writes, but they are not seizing an abstract right. They are taking an actual place, a place to lay their heads. Like people just intrinsically know that they got to have this thing, they got to have housing, so they're just taking it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah. Quick poll.
Oh, sorry. I just want to point out something really quick.
Go ahead.
It's like not an extra point. The company that produced the cladding for Grenfell. Grenfell. I can't remember their name. Iconic, I think, or something like that. They also produced drones. Some of the ones that were used to afterwards to investigate the building, to see what went wrong and all this kind of stuff. But also this whole thing where it's like afterwards they pushed it really hard as like, this is why we need, like emergency services need drones and things to be able to kind of, like monitor everything and get in there and all this kind of shit like that. Which is just like this whole thing.
That's why I brought up Grenfell in the first place, was because you said about like you said about elected officials who are property developers and they have investment portfolios in real estate. The number of Tory landlords is in the Tory party, MPs who are elected, who are landlords has increased since the Grenfell fire, and and not small scale landlords either, but landlords who are renting on the scale of like they own a whole fucking building like that, and they're literally installing the same cladding onto buildings that they could make illegal to prevent fires like that.
It's like there's so much to go into in this, like the same company, they like run they run classes to teach BIPOC kids how to operate drones and shit like that. It's just like, wow, like if you really want to do something that's gonna help out Black, Indigenous people of color and shit like that, you could maybe like stop making a product that like fucking burns to death, but whatever.
Nicole, you wanted
to
make a poll, right?
Stuff to Israel and stuff.
So now that chat, I hope, has a little better acquainted with the concept of squatting. Can we quickly define squatting? Squatting is basically sitting in a property that you don't own and just
I did a little drawing. I did a little drawing.
Oh, what's the drawing?
It says
squatting. It's really cool.
Really cool.
That's not really a definition, but I mean it's true.
Squatting.
Not cringe.
Not cringe. Okay.
Not cringe.
Okay, chat. Did you all get that? Chat has a really hard time understanding not cringe.
It was, wasn't it?
It's chat. Chat will.
I did a lot of work this week. This is the most.
Amy,
work
could you give us a really good definitive definition
very short one, so we can
squatting?
A
concise but good one.
I would say squatting is the technically illegal occupancy of taking over either state or privately owned property that is sitting vacant, not offering any utility, and could be working to further enrich the landlord class as a vehicle investment that will generate property once it is rehabilitated and put onto the market. And you're simply taking over a building to stop the vicious cycle of tenancy or predatory investment that is to the detriment of working class folk, and it's class solidarity to stand in the way of this process coming to fruition. So to reiterate the point of squatting is based and not cringe, I would like to say it might be your duty as a comrade.
I like that a lot.
To squat in a vacant property if you are willing to go through the legal ramifications that will most likely come your way. But it takes a very brave person to stand up to this vicious cycle. And I commend anyone who was willing and ready and able to do so.
Or a lot of desperate people.
Yeah, because sometimes it's not like they're willing, it's like they have to, or else they perish.
I just want to quibble the technically illegal thing, because I do think, like, as I highlighted earlier with the Squatter's Handbook, there are cases where we could call something squatting, but it is still technically allowed by law, even though, like, landlords absolutely hate it. The landlord class absolutely hate it. Like, it is against what, like, the law is being designed to try and, like, it's against the side that the law is on, for sure. Yeah. But there are, like, cases where you can, like, loophole through it or whatever. And, like, that doesn't make that
and that's happened in Philadelphia. If I may, I can, like, go over, because I kind of read over the crux of the case of it's the state Supreme Court case, the city of Philadelphia versus Galdo.
When was this?
And this was there was a case that began in 2014.
Okay.
And it eventually made it to the Supreme Court case. It made it to the Supreme Court. It went through appellate court. And basically, the city of Philadelphia had exercised eminent domain to build out a highway, or rather a freeway system to connect I-95 to what is called the Delaware Freeway. And they bought a whole bunch of property. And then after the construction of the freeway system, there were existing lots that sat vacant for literally years. And some guy started to use the property, kind of turned it into like a little bit of a communal space. People would park their cars there. And in 2013, the city tried to reclaim it, recoup it, and put it back into the hands of a private developer. and the person who appealed the case, claiming that the city didn't have a right to own the land and was immune to the adverse possession of the land because they did not fulfill their obligation to make the plot of land accessible or for public use. And so eventually there was a Supreme Court decision that ruled in favor of the defendant, if you will, the person who was trying to keep the plot of land. And he won the case because the city just sat on that vacant property. They were only going to sell it back to the private developer to increase their tax revenue. And local courts essentially ruled in favor of the city, stating that they were able to hold on to the land and do nothing with it. And it was completely legal, did not constitute the same kind of outcome that would give them reason to have ownership of the land, since it was not used for the public. It was just sitting there.
Yeah.
And that does happen, especially in areas that have city-owned lots that are currently not under any sort of use whatsoever.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's some people asking in the chat, like, so is squatting relating to residing somewhere, or can you just make the space into something else? Like, it kind of depends on where you are. Like, I know, I think in New Zealand you have to be occupying that space for it to legally get transferred into ownership for you. You have to be occupying that space as a residence for like 20 years, and then it can get shifted over to you. But you can't even leave for like, you know, more than a week or so at any given time in that whole thing. And you can't get anyone else to come in and, you know, like house sit it for you or whatever. You have to be there the entire time. Which means that, down here, there hasn't been many wins for squatters down here. But an interesting thing I found, though, is that a guy in Australia, the most recent win that I could find for squatter over there, was kind of not a win at all. It was a guy that he was already a landlord, owned a bunch of houses, noticed that a house was empty in an area, the door was off its hinges, went in, found out that the person that lived there had died, and he basically just got a locksmith in, changed the locks, and started renting it out. And so became the landlord of this property. And he actually was able to take it into court, and he won.
Whoa.
But it
That's
was
not a win for squatters.
He was operating it as a business, you know, like and so that
Christ.
counted for him, which is like a real ratchet thing to do. And if you look up the dude, he's got like a bunch of, you know, he's been in the news a bunch of times for doing dodgy shit like that. But so because he was operating a business in that time, it counted, even though he wasn't physically at the address. That kind of thing. So you really got to look into what works for you.
Can I say, like, when people say like this, the introduction that I wrote, right, like leftist slogans like property is theft, people don't necessarily click with that, like what it means. But like that example where a landlord rocked up to a place where like it was empty and because someone had died, and he just took it and then just started charging people money to be there.
It's
right?
smart though. It's a smart business decision.
All landlords, and the entire history of colonialism and capitalism, and before that feudalism, is literally that. And that's why people say 100%. Property is theft. Like there might be other steps involved, like, you know, it's a different guy who finds the place to, you know, and the other guy inherits it or whatever, you know, other steps, but the story boils down to the same thing. Some fucking dickhead just walks up to a place and is like, this is mine now, and then people have to pay money to be there from then on. That's why property is theft.
That is like the purest dissection or like representation of like private property, essentially, with regards to like housing. Some asshole shows up to something that isn't theirs, and they go, "This is mine now, and if you want it, you have to pay me." But those things are like necessary to live for the rest of everyone. Everyone's like, I have to have that or else I die. Like, well, I was the first asshole, so now you have to fucking be a slave somewhere, give me your slave wages, blah 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 blah, or else I get to like make your family suffer, so you have to go through me. That's like the purest.
Nicole, you said you wanted to do a poll, right?
Yeah, I wanted to say. Okay, so like okay, so like the most brief way that I can understand squatting, just to have like a really brief sentence, because I know chat gets kind of distracted sometimes. Chatters. My sweet little chatters, at least. I can't speak for the other Red Planet viewers, but my sweet little chatters. Squatting to me is residing in a property, like living in a place without paying rent when you're supposed to actually probably pay rent. Like somebody's place that they own it, and you just go like a home that is empty, but if the landlord doesn't rent it actively, you're still just showing up there and you're living there, and that's supposed to be like a property that's sold to somebody. But you're like,
the legal name, which like Amy said earlier, is adverse possession. In a way, that name, because there are a few different names. Like I know that in the Netherlands they call it cracking, for example, which I love that name because it's kind of like it's this thing and then you crack it and now it's like different. But like I find the term adverse possession really helpful for understanding what squatting fundamentally is, because it's like the law defines it right as being like an opposite way, an unusual way, an aggressive way of owning something, right? Yeah. What the way the law likes for people to own stuff is the capitalist way, and fundamentally it's like claiming a property or land in a human way, like just a way that is counter to that system. And I think that's maybe the shortest definition we could get. Like,
okay,
it's just
that adverse position is quite important. A lot of the time, like over here, it's really important if you're a squatter to prove adverse position, that you've been there for 20 years or whatever. And so that means that you have to have shown that you've been like maintaining the house. You haven't just been like leaving it to fall apart. You know, you've done things to really make sure that, like,
it's ironic because landlords don't do that shit either.
I know, yeah, exactly right. It's like you basically have to prove that it is a benefit for, you know, like this house or for that area to have you know, in there maintaining this house or whatever. And I think Pixel Cooker in the chat also mentioned property taxes involved also, which is a thing in some places. If you successfully squat a place, they can hit you with the property tax for the period that you have been there as well, which is like
hell.
Super dog shit. But it's a thing that in some states in America and stuff, it's a thing. And I think in Australia, in one of the states of Australia, you have to do it as well, which is something that I dug up when I was looking for this. So that's another thing where it's like you kind of have to it's like all these ways that you have to prove legitimacy to the state by like jumping through these like ridiculous hoops of like, you know, like what a good tenant or a good landowner does or whatever. And it's like, man, like, yeah, I've never had a landlord that fixed up a house or whatever like that, you know? Like it's
imagine a world where landlords have to prove they are fixing up the house.
Exactly, you know, like
fucking imagine.
Like landlords don't have to jump through the same hoops, you know? Like it's anyway, sorry.
Okay, so all I wanted to ask, all I want to know is I want to chat to, now that you, I think, understand what squatting is. I want to know if any of you are realizing that you've actually squatted before. Does anyone here be like, well, actually, I did squat. I did live in a property without paying rent.
We were actually really close to, I want to say this, like we were actually really, really close to squatting because we like Nat and I like had a really bad living situation where somebody basically, like in this place, my ex moved out very suddenly and left us high and dry. And how it ended up getting resolved was that a very rich friend just was like, here, have a bunch of money and, you know, pay 6 months up front and then you can pay it back to me. And it was like an amicable kind of loan situation. But before that became an option, Nat and I were like increasingly seriously just like, yeah, like we're just gonna stay. We'll just fucking stay here. Like, so we kind of came like that close. Like when I say the very rich friend, like they're my friend now, but they got in touch to make that offer because I was complaining about it on Twitter. We didn't have, as far as we knew, like any kind of backup, and it was so close, but like, you know, not the practicalities of squatting. So
there is one thing that I'd like to share, and this is my only experience with anything to do with a squat ever. Really, really close to me, round the corner, there is a old theatre, and it used to be squatted. It was squatted by a bunch of people. I knew a bunch of people in those in the squat, all very sound people. And I am a videographer by trade. I film stuff, edit it for, freelance kind of thing. And one day I was approached by this person who I knew had a couple of mutual friends with me, who also was a squatter. He was squatting in another building somewhere with a bunch of people. And he wanted to get us together, sit down in a pub and talk about sorting out these fake squatters. So, by the way, this is not like, I'm not sat here being like, oh my God, squatting is really bad. This is sort of an anecdote to tell you things to kind of look out for if you're going to get involved in squatters movements, because this is a legit thing that happened to me. This guy said to me, everyone in that squat at the theater is a pedo. Source, just trust me, bro. We want you to come and film us in balaclavas threatening them. And that's, we're going to pay you like 500 quid for that.
Is that
so
like
that's a thing.
Joey Salads type
douchebaggery?
No, it was even more insidious than that. The guy also said to me, you used to train Muay Thai, right? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, you could probably get involved. And I said, what do you mean I could probably get involved? Like, oh no, you could probably like help us beat them up if shit gets. I was like, are you serious?
What the fuck?
So
did you take his money? Or?
Well, no, I was way too much of a baby leftist to even understand like how base that would be to take his money and literally not do anything. But yeah, so in the UK, certainly there is a sort of contingent of people who do like squats for the purpose of squat raves, and it's that's fine. I guess because you're still squatting, right? And it's like I'm not gonna like gatekeep what squats are right and what squats aren't.
Yeah, of course.
But just to be mindful, chat, there are people out there who will try and exploit you and try and sort of say to you, these people aren't squatting properly. So that's why it's important for someone like Amy to be here, to be talking to us about like, the things that you need to be looking for in a movement of squatters in order to be able to if you are going to get involved with, a community like that, to know what to look out for if someone is taking the piss out of you, kind of thing.
Yeah,
basically.
I've never like lived in a squat, but I've had plenty of friends that have over the years, and like it's like a thing. Like if you grow up around like like punk music and stuff like that, you always get like there'll be like the punk squat where it'll just be a bunch of people living in a flat somewhere and like a building that's probably falling apart or something like that. Like there was some I've been to some pretty derelict looking squats over the years, but it's like it's quite common, and it used to be really common in a lot of like kind of like I guess like alternative subcultures or whatever over here. But the wild thing is, so all the areas where these houses were, like this is like around like central Auckland, like Grey Lynn and stuff. Those are all like, $1 million plus properties at the moment. Like actually some of them around there would be like, 1.5, maybe close to $2 million for like these places that we were, hanging out in as like a squat or whatever. And some of them, it's still the same building. It's just that the land has increased in value so much. So I do feel like there is this like element of squatting as like, like obviously it's like a resisting gentrification or whatever like that. But I feel like there's like something to be said about like people think of it just as like, oh, this is like these like like these like dirty punks are like living in these squats or whatever like that, and they're like it's like they're just like or whatever, like they just think of them as just dumb kids or whatever like that. But these days when I see stuff like that, I think like, no, this is good. Like those particularly like the punks that like smell and like like play their instruments like too loud late at night or whatever like that.
Absolutely.
They're keeping those property prices down.
Well, yeah, I mean,
that's
like,
really funny.
Squatting as a social force is like the opposite of gentrification. No, I mean, right? Like, Amy, I feel like we absolutely have to get onto the topic of like how to support squats in your area, because we've not long left, right? And that's really important, isn't it?
Can we just real quick? Are y'all familiar with anal?
I've been known.
I have had sex numerous times, so I'm
you're referring to, of course, everyone here on the panel is intimately familiar with Autonomous Nation of Anarchist Libertarians. Yes,
absolutely.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
I've done that loads. I've done that loads.
So interesting to hear about the engagement with the people who are trying to take down the squatters because they are pedos. Because fascists have routinely targeted anal. So it could have very well been maybe a group of Nazis who were asking you to like use your skills to attack.
Oh yeah, they absolutely were. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Like I knew that it like not like straight away, but after sort of learning about like what squatting actually is and like how it benefits people and stuff, I was like, oh, that was completely unbased. Like what the fuck would they want to do that for? Do you know what I mean? And also like it was straight away like I knew that he was talking shit anyway because like I said, I knew some of the people in there, and it's like, nah, they weren't pedos.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
But that's like the standard thing. Like a lot of like fascist types will be like
they love
slandering like leftists and communists as like like degenerates or whatever.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, it's like we've talked before on the show about how like I predict, we with anti-work, right? Like there's a mass just quitting and dropping out movement, which I think is based as hell. But I've said before that I think that like we'll see the same thing with cops. We will see a mass quit, like a mass resigning of cops as their job more and more just becomes explicitly just to like evict people who are desperately trying to, like we were saying, Amy was saying about the subaltern class. Was it in what settlements? Informal settlements. Thank you. Yeah. As cops' entire job becomes that, right? Yeah. It'll become unpalatable. But like the other force alongside that is like far right groups who just like brutalize people for fun because they just like it's their like they just fucking love to like terrorize the most vulnerable in society.
They take it upon themselves. We saw that time and time again with the Black Lives Matter movement. They would just show up self-deputized, fucking Kyle, whatever.
Yeah.
Just taking things upon, and acting like they're vigilantes, protecting property.
Like if the Marxist notion of like overthrowing the current power system is to seize the means of production, the fascist one fundamentally is to seize the state monopoly on violence. Like the main fascist grievance is that they don't have the state monopoly on violence, and that's why they like cry so fucking hard whenever cops are against them in the slightest. They absolutely melt down because like they hate that they don't have the monopoly on violence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, as we saw sorry, go on.
I was going to say, we're kind of coming up towards the end of the stream now. So
we really desperately need to talk about
how can we support squatters, Amy? What's the best way for us to do that?
So what's really great about squatters is that they have a lot of ideas on how to go about their political activism. They're already incredibly politically active, helping them with the technical skills or resources to get their story out. As long as it is completely 100% consensual, if you are filming them, then that is actually a really good way to get eyes on the issue. So in Philadelphia, I know I keep going back to Philadelphia, but it's a really good example. Squatters who occupied a plot of land directly next to the Philadelphia's housing authority, they did a 3-month-long protest where they camped out in front of PHA and demanded that they hand over unoccupied vacant housing units that were under the ownership of PHA in order to get them safely housed during the pandemic. And it was about 3 months worth of negotiations, and those who are experiencing the life of a squatter, they were at the negotiating table. And a lot of the assistance came from, organizers and activists who are also squatters. They are often called homeless activists or squatting activists because they know what they want and they have the ability to articulate their demands. It's just that they don't necessarily have the toolkit or resources that are available to give them the political agency. So the best thing that you can do is to give them your time, give them your money, set up a GoFundMe. They have everything that they need from the perspective of self-organizing and self-determination. They know what they need more than far better than any activist from an outsider perspective could offer. And giving them those tools or those resources is the best way that you can help squatters. They're already self-organized. They are already incredibly sophisticated in their way of living, and they have the ability to state their demands. They just need a little bit more financial support. And from a perspective of mutual aid, while they are collectively organizing and bargaining and they are demonstrating a protest, they need food, they need water, they might need blankets, they might need something that you can provide them materially. And that all comes through having some sort of rapport that might require a little bit of trust. If you are going to act as an advocate on their behalf and help them and listen to them and respect their wishes or their needs and kind of follow by their lead. I think a lot of times we think we have to like impose upon a movement our own beliefs, and that's probably the worst thing that you could do if you are trying to truly help somebody or a group that you are not necessarily familiar with or have the same experience with.
Yeah.
You should be taking a back seat and listening to what they want you to do instead of what you think you should be doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a very good advice that I think many of us could benefit from. The taking a back seat and not trying to
don't co-opt it.
Don't co-opt it. Don't show up and be like, now that I'm here, this is my moment to show to me and whoever else that I'm in fact a hero or whatever. We talk about this with like revolution.
I'm the king of the squats.
Yeah. This idea of like the revolution is when my moment I charge. It's this like very individualist like thing, and I think it's important that we note like and again, this is a radical shift, but we are trying to build a movement of it that is not one person who gets that's not like not one person that gets all the fame and whatever. This is nobody should have you shouldn't have like the hero and then everyone else is just like, oh yeah, I guess that's great, thank you. I'm not explaining myself well. I've had half a beer, so excuse me.
No, that's really good, because a lot of people do want to have that claim to like, not like fame, but a lot of people want to be able to have what they think is the proper response to their involvement.
Yeah,
and it's like it's a thankless task, and if you are going into any kind of organizing effort to receive some sort of praise that you think that you are deserving of, then like don't show up, because you're just going to be rubbing people the wrong way.
Yeah, again, like I'll reiterate, another staple of our show, copy our show. You know what I mean? Like, do what we're doing, kind of thing. It's so important to, absolutely. The movement is all of us.
Yeah,
all across the world. Every single
one thing I'm curious about is like I'm on the verge of like, should we suggest for the homework like people find out about local squats if they want? Maybe that's a bonus extra homework people could do, but maybe it's not the main one. But like what I wanted to ask was, because I realized I don't know this, like, Amy, is there a way people can find, like, is there a resource that people kind of like log maps or anything, or do you just have to like know the neighborhood and know that people are there? Like, is there a way to know?
There's also very location dependent. So, because Amy's
I think a lot of squatters do not want to be known. Like they are trying very, very hard to like fly under the radar. And only whenever there's a dire situation, like with Occupy PHA in Philadelphia, it came down to a life or death crisis, and a lot of individuals who were starting to be forcibly removed, they had to act very swiftly. And because there's been a longstanding history of activists fighting directly with the city, with the vacant city-owned properties, that did kind of, I think that kind of reignited a former flame that had already existed in Philadelphia that was much easier to kind of pick up where they had left off. And I think a lot of these squatter movements that are happening on a case-by-case basis, they're not well known because there's no existing, so to answer your question, there is no real network in place that if there were, it could easily be weaponized and then utilized by like real estate groups and the local police that could make any like any means of communicating much more difficult, or put them in even more risk, or like jeopardize them even more.
That's what I figured. That's really unfortunate, but that does make sense.
I think what we so like I knew about the squat round the corner from me, not necessarily because it was round the corner from me, but because of my involvement as a DJ in the rave scene, in the local rave scene. And as Tim was saying before, in New Zealand, it's like punks, right? It's like, so, you know, they're musicians as well. So maybe a good way to find a squat in your area could be check out the local music scene. Specifically, like if there's punks, if there's, you know, a rave scene in the UK that you know of and stuff, maybe you're gonna find a squat that way, you know, because that's, I still, like, in people contacts that I have from those days, you know, like ex-partners and stuff like that, they tell me all the time, oh, I went to this squat rave in Bristol, oh, I went to this squat rave in London and stuff, you know, so you will eventually find squats that way.
And there's like occasionally you do get things through I guess kind of like lefty channels, you know, like that, like, you know, if you're involved with an organization, there might be someone who is, you know, involved with a squat or something like that, even if it's like not, you know, directly like living there. They might be like, hey, we're aware of these people, this, you know, like they're squatting here, and there may be a day where we have to kind of show up for them or something like that. Like I've heard of you know, squats and stuff just through kind of like back channels and stuff, where people be like, you know, yeah, maybe like something's happening over here, so we just, like, even though what they're doing is like, it's not, they don't see it as a political act, they're just people that are like living in a house or whatever like that. And, you know, like it aligns with our kind of things to, you know, like stand up for them if they need it, if something's going to happen or something like that.
Yeah, definitely.
There
are a couple of comments in chat, one from Supreme H Court and one from Rinky Dink, that I think mesh well together and form a good point. Supreme H Court said, I think being involved with tenants unions could help people squatting, and that is true from two sides. Like someone, like, as I said before, like one form of squatting is where people are living in a place and then they try to get evicted. Like, you know, the landlord tries to evict them, and then if they resist eviction, they are then squatting if they're not paying rent. And Rinky Dink says, probably the best thing that communities can do to make squatting more supported is to normalize eviction resistance. If you have large numbers that willing to resist tenant evictions, then squatters are more likely to reach out for eviction resistance support. Make all eviction resistance more normal and visible, and it makes everyone safer. And again, that's kind of why I floated earlier the idea of like getting in touch with your neighbors, just go and introduce yourself to your neighbors. Take baked goods if you want to be a real, you know, real wholesome bean or whatever. But like, you know, just go and say hi, right? Because if there was the possibility of a rent strike in solidarity with people, or a rent strike just to resist, you know, or whatever, knowing your neighbors and organizing together with, like, knowing your neighbor's name and then knowing your name is the absolute first step. If they're like, for me, I've been meaning to go and meet my neighbors for a really long time, just because I'm a trans woman, and like if I'm worried that there could be horrible fascist goons in the neighborhood, right, who would want to kick my head in, like, I feel like if I knew my neighbors' names and they knew my name, then at least it wouldn't be them who would be the people I should worry about, because like they would have at least had like a bare minimum of 5-minute conversation with me. Which is something to consider as well.
Yeah, it's one of those things as well where it's like, when you, like, if you're in trouble, if you're at your house or anything like that, or if something's going on, or even if you just need help with something, you know, like if you don't know your neighbors, you're not going to be like, oh, I should go see Joe next door or whatever like that. You're going to be like, okay, I've got to call like a friend who might live like 20 minutes away or something like that, you know, like that. So I think it's always good, you know, just to be like, if you're living in an apartment building or something like that, to know people around you or whatever. And it's, even if it's just as simple as like, you know, like, oh, I need to borrow a screwdriver or something like that. But, you know, like, it could be like, hey, look, you know, like, you know, you might be like, there's some people that have like threatened me or something like that. If you see anyone coming around the neighborhood, you know, that they look like they might be vaguely fashy or some shit like that. Like, you know, if you know someone, then, you know, you can, it's a lot easier to have those conversations.
Yeah, you can start leading into community defense organizing as well as other kinds of organizing. Yeah, I mean, meeting your neighbors leads into all sorts of kinds of organizing. and just being in community with people. And that's something we've highlighted, right, is like how much our modern environment has been designed to alienate us and keep us from knowing other people. And I don't want to just sound like love and sunshine is the answer to everything, but like I do think that people need to understand the genuinely radical potential of being in community with people who live physically close to you, because like it sounds like it's nothing, but it's actually everything. Like,
well, Sophie,
it's guaranteed that your class interests will align too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yes. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to mention Cuba. Going back to what Nicole was saying. I know.
Goddamn
what...
tanky mule shilling for big Cuba every day.
I've had it.
Can't believe it. Going back to what Nicole was saying about her mom earlier on, in that like during COVID and the pandemic, she's really been struggling, due to a lack of community and stuff like that. Like this is something that is, totally flipped on its head in Cuba, right? You know what I mean? It's like the community is like fucking everything. And it sounds actually very similar in a way to what you were talking about, Tim, in that like, Maori people will like, live in a community, and that shit is like the basis of society, rather than just like, oh, well, sometimes we need to go to the pub kind of thing. And it is like so based to see like the positive elements of that in Cuba. Because of the embargo and shit, they find it hard to like get games and like set up gaming connections. But people in towns and cities in Cuba have literally created local intranets where they just have massive fucking LAN parties together. Like it's absolutely sick. Like
same thing in Ukraine and Czechia for a long time back in the day and stuff, like these gigantic small intranets.
Wait till Cyberpunk 2022 comes out, and that's exactly one of my prescriptions, is that's literally what we need to do.
Just what we need to do is become gamers. LAN party.
We need to seize the means of communication by creating our own internet that is not state controlled. Is the
we need our own WoW private servers. That's what we need.
No. When you put it that way, now I think about it, actually, World of Warcraft is probably the way to communism. Actually,
that's right. You got it.
Should we get into homework and stuff then?
We're overtime. We're getting overtime now.
Yeah, because we're overtime, and I've got to go get boosted soon. So.
Oh shit! Okay, cool.
How's your kitten, by the way?
So,
how's little kitten?
Chat, who remembers?
That's where I disappeared a little bit earlier because I had some banging around, but no, she's good. She's good. She's doing good.
So, chat, who remembers the homework from last week?
Chat.
1 for yes.
No, don't 1. No. They're gonna just press.
Wait,
1.
what? Wait, no, wait. Did I do it again? Oh fuck! I'm sorry.
Say what the homework is. What was the homework?
Say what it was. Don't listen to me. I just draw pretty pictures. Pretty pictures.
I do.
Oh dang! A couple of
people
already forgotten.
You can't just say I do. You have to say what.
Oh fuck.
Okay, so last week we were talking with FT Signifier about non-reformist reforms, policy changes which would genuinely liberate people for continued class struggle, right?
Got it.
The quick way to remember: free people, right? Yeah. So if you got, if more people get out, and then they're freed, right? And so the homework in the chat just said, "Go
learn about union." Sorry,
that was week 1, and it wasn't even.
That was number 1. That was number 1, and it wasn't.
It
wasn't even what it was.
Yeah,
sorry,
that
was too funny.
Sweet little chat.
To learn if there were any non-reformist reforms in your kind of local policy environment. For example, for me, it would be the UK, or maybe there were possibilities of it, London, that kind of administrative level, or the whole country. And therefore, be able to identify where electoral politics is worthwhile and not bother with the rest. Yeah. Well, if that's your choice. So who did that? 1s if you did that. No need to bother with 0s. We just want to see who did it. I'm just curious to see who kind of went away and engaged with that, because it was a little bit more of a technical homework than we have been giving. Like before, we had get a first aid kit and join a union and stuff like this, and it was a bit more kind of accessible for everybody. And I think that this one required a lot of learning, right?
We have 2, 3 1s.
Okay.
4.
Just a few. Good. Just a few, but that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Again, as I say every week, these things are ongoing things. If you didn't join a union in the first week, even if you got it wrong and you thought that it was about learning about union, you can remedy that now. You can go and do that now instead. Don't
we just
worry
like
about
for
it.
people to be able to take what we're talking about on the day and take it away somewhere. It doesn't have to be that you have to do it in the week. So,
but we would like it if you did
hopefully,
that, and you do get a gold star.
yeah. Hopefully, people who watched last week will be able to identify non-reformist reforms and not bother with the rest and recognize it as gibberish in future. But what are we setting as homework this week? What do we reckon?
I think what we were talking about before was like, I mean, unless Amy has any suggestions, if not, then maybe just like get to know a neighbor. Get to know your neighbors.
Introducing yourself to a neighbor. It's a big one. Our last go outside and do something was not well received. People did not do it because it's scary and it involves touching grass.
Actually, yeah, exactly.
But
it is. Yeah.
I want to set it. You know what? I just want to set the high bar. Let's just do it. Everybody's got to go introduce themselves to at least one neighbor.
I also want to
Shoot
mention
for the stars and hit the sky.
That's right. That's the saying, exactly. I also want to reiterate. I want to read a comment by my editor who wrote. I think it was my editor, Tamaki Killing Bird. I can't find the comment, but basically it amounted to: if your neighbor sucks, don't be dissuaded. Like, some people suck. Some people are like, okay.
Yeah, that's
but
true.
there's still a lot of value in getting to know your neighbors. Please don't let that be like the perma lesson of, wow, you getting to know my neighbors always goes badly. No, it's there are pieces of shit out there, and you know, try to protect yourself. Like Sophie was saying before, being trans, it can pose another, you know, depending also the area that you live in, and if it's not being trans, if it's some other marginalized identity, you know, that's always something to be aware of. I want you all to be safe first and foremost. That's important. But
yes,
also,
so can I just
can I lay out a plan? We'll set this homework. We will say goodbye and log off, plug our stuff, disappear, and then as I said before, Nicole, I'd really like if you could show the thing I've just linked in the Shadowy Cabal group chat from timestamp 3800 to like kind of until it ends. As the way to play us out, because there's an amazing clip on the end of this, and also I hope people watch the whole thing later. I'll link it in chat too.
Okay.
So should we set that as the homework? People go and meet their neighbor.
Yeah,
Again, I know nobody will, but you should give it a go. Yeah. Anyone who wants to will be very proud. You'll get a gold star.
You will get a gold star, and if you already know your neighbor, maybe speak to your neighbor about tenants unions.
Yeah.
I don't know how everybody thinks about that, but that could be pretty based.
That's
Talk to them about the concept of an eviction resistance, right?
Ooh.
Okay.
All right.
Tim, I know you got to run off and get boosted. So where can people find you?
Cool. Yeah. So for those of you that have just joined us or whatever, my name's Tim. I have a YouTube channel and a Twitch channel, both called Conquest of Dread. I do video essays about you know, this kind of thing. But when I stream, I mainly just like talk shit while playing games. And while that does lead towards, you know, like lefty kind of discussions, you know, like it's not as serious as like on Red Planet, for example. And I'm over on Twitter as Dread Conquest, where I just shit post. And yeah, sweet, cool. It's been great. I think this was a really good conversation. But yeah. That's me. What about you, Mule?
Me, I'm DJ Mule. I'm DJ Mule on Twitch. I do React Anti-Leftist content Monday to Thursday. Sometimes I play, like on Saturday, I play Bible adventure games for a laugh. That was pretty.
What?
That was hilarious.
I need to tune in to DJ Mule stream.
Yeah.
Spicy content.
So yeah, and on Twitter I'm DJ Mule _ I just shit post on there. No, I don't. I post cool stuff. It's very based. I'm really cool. I'm a cool guy. What about our lovely guest, Amy? Where can people find you?
You can find me on twitch.tv/AmyeC3 and Twitter as well. I'm not so good at shit posting, but I do make sure I let everyone know when I go live, and that's about the extent of it that I can promise consistently. I'm also on YouTube, Housing News with AmyeC3. And those are probably all that matters. So.
I'm an Amy sub on Twitch.
Housing news thing. That's awesome.
Yeah, that is dope.
Can we see the Amy sub?
I'm looking that up right now. That's really cool.
Are you, by the way,
Yeah,
are you going to be streaming for a while? I think you're streaming right now, right? Are you going to be streaming for a while?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I usually stream for like 5-6 hours on Sunday.
Okay. That's just some interesting information. Okay.
Do with that much. Well,
I'm just asking questions.
Okay.
Right. And yeah,
Not for no
assuming
reason.
everyone knows where to find Bad Buddy because we're
What about
currently
Sophie?
on stream. Oh yeah,
Sophie from Mars, all the stuff. Patreon.com/Sophie from Mars. That's how I pay my rent and bills and buy silly little dresses and pizza and drugs. How about we play us out, Nicole? Bye, everybody. See ya.
See ya.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for coming. Do your homework. Hey.
All right.
Wait. Did I do that right? Am I supposed to do that? Was I supposed to leave everyone? I'm so confused. Did I do the right thing? I don't know. Wait, what's happening? Was I supposed to duck out? Was that the right decision? I don't know. I think I did it wrong. Fuck! Well, you know what? I'm sorry. I think we did it wrong. It's okay. Okay. Chat, will you forgive me? Well, I still want to watch this video. It's only for a few seconds. It's like literally for like 2.5 minutes. We'll do it live. Fuck it. We will do it live.
That's the only way. So we've been accused of political movement. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. I don't know much about politics, but the only thing is people, this group is a group of people desperate in need of housing, and we fight it, and we try everything right into the mayors, the one before this one and the other one before the other one, and so and it didn't work. Making a picket line, making sittings, all kinds, it didn't work. So it seems that the only way was breaking into those buildings, and the next step will be not breaking into all buildings, we'll be breaking into the luxury buildings to see how they will like it. That's what they will. When they see a bunch of people, they're all right. We are risking getting arrested, but still we don't care because we are going to show them that the next quarters movement won't be in run-down buildings. It will be in fancy houses. So they know that we really mean business, because as it is now, they are scared. They are. They don't know what to do with us. We are on the driver's seat, for one. We're working towards taking control of the community. We also need control in our jobs. Racial movement started with few people. It's like a little plant. You plant a little seed and you see it growing and growing and growing. And that is the first step.
That's it. That was great. Fucking badass. Fucking badass. Excuse me. Effin' badass.
of our community has taught us and our allies to move in the shadows to remain invisible, and as you will soon find out, You cannot defeat an enemy that you cannot see.